This program is brought to you by Newsworks in cooperation with Eau Claire County. This program is simulcast on WRFP-LP 101.9 FM.
I call to order this regular meeting of the Eau Claire County Board of Supervisors on this Tuesday, August the 20th. Supervisors, please rise for honoring the flag and a moment of reflection by Supervisor Anton. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. As we look at our budget and the related shortfall that we anticipate, we have to look at some options. And as I thought about that, I considered someone who was running a pretty tough road with our country, Abe Lincoln, and the fact that he was successful might give us some insight as to how we might proceed and think about ourselves as the job shows up ahead of us. Covering two areas. One is the moral high ground as he saw it. His mother, Nancy Hance Lincoln, said when he was 9 years old, she was on her deathbed, the last words she said to his older sister and to him, "Be good to one another." Certainly that can serve us well. Lincoln's beliefs were that, among other things, we should mitigate greed, and we see that with lobbyists who were once then become legislators and write laws and whatever else goes on. Certainly that's a problem today. Openness, some things are classified, maybe they shouldn't be. Maybe we speak out against the wrongs that we see, maybe we don't. He felt it was important to do that. He believed in leveling the playing field. That is, that wealthy citizens and special interest groups should be given consideration when they speak, and we should put the necessary clamps on things that they might be doing to enable others to get what they deserve. And one comment that he made in the Cooper Institute educational school, as we know, on February 27, 1860, at the ending of a speech, he said, "Let us have faith that right makes might, and in that faith, let us to the end dare to do our duty as we understand it." Abe often quoted the U.S. Constitution, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bible to support and illustrate his points. He was well versed in many areas of reasoning, relatively moderate complex mathematics, and various other things, and he was able, with all of these abilities he had, to confront situations, and we know it had to be tough, but nevertheless he did things in addition to solving or resolving the problem he had with the Confederacy. He put in a 100-mile canal in the Great Lakes, a 1,300-mile network of railroads, Transcontinental Railroad, National Bank System, Internal Revenue Service, Homestead Act, and a whole bunch of other things. So he was not only paying attention to the people that he had to serve and resolve the problem he had with the Confederacy, but he was paying attention to other things as well. And the one thing that I remember that I think may serve us well here is that he looked at the competence of people with him. The group of people he had as members of his cabinet were members of the group that were running against him as president, and the most well-esteemed people within the country, all of which you might imagine had a humongous problem with their self-worth as they saw it. And so that arrogance was a problem to him, but he was strong enough to overcome that, and because they were strong people, and we were looking at that as we were looking at our abilities here, strong people to do things for us and with us, he was able to achieve a great deal. So hopefully we can learn from others, and he is just an example, but I would offer that as something that may be worth considering as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor Anton. The next item on our agenda is the roll call. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and indicate your presence. Screen's not up. What is it? We have 27 members present. We have quorum. Thank you very much. Tonight's meeting will be broadcast on Valley Media Works Charter Channel 994 on Thursday at 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. following the meeting. WFRP LP 101.9 FM and online at valleymediaworks.org. The next item on our agenda is approval of the Journal of Proceedings. You have a copy in your packet. Chair looks for a motion. Motion from Supervisor Beckfield to approve the Journal of Proceedings. A second, Supervisor Wilkie. Thank you. Are there any additions, deletions, corrections? We can do this by voice vote. All those in favor of approving the Journal of Proceedings as distributed, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Thank you. The next item on our agenda, before we do that, I'm sorry, there are a couple of small corrections to the agenda. Under the Finance and Budget Committee, file number 19-20047, disallowing the claim of Mill Ridge Estates, that item is being removed from the agenda because, according to our revised county code, that item is decided in Budget and Finance. Is there any question regarding that?
And I can offer an explanation.
Yes, please.
I don't know if my mic's on.
You're on.
Okay. The situation is that back in February, this section of the code 4.90.020 was modified, and this is actually the first claim that is large enough that normally in the old course of action it would have come to the board for disallowance after being in front of the Finance and Budget Committee. The new language of the code is that disallowance is made now by the committee, and then notice is sent out by the county clerk, and no longer needs to come before the county board for disallowance purposes. And so that happened earlier last month, I believe it was. And so the committee did disallow the claim, and notice has already been sent to the parties in this matter. It does not need to be considered by the county board.
Thank you. The other change in our agenda is under oral reports. The Alice active shooter training is going to be delayed. It will not be tonight. There are no other changes. Right? There are not. Okay. We'll proceed with the agenda now. The next item on our agenda is public comment. In this period, we call forward people who signed up wishing to make comment. I will call them up in the order in which they signed up. First will be Lance Basting. You come forward. We allow 3 minutes for public comment. Followed by Richard Freitag. I'd ask Richard to stand on the side here and be ready. Thank you. Mr. Basting.
Thank you. My name is Lance Basting. I live at 6137 Andrew Drive, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, 54701. Good evening. Thank you for having me address you again tonight. I've been here before. Purpose of me speaking at an earlier meeting about amending Ordinance 10.20 relating to towing and impound vehicles in Eau Claire County was to point out the exploitation on the part of the towing companies, private towing companies, in regards to the current system of towing and impound vehicles in Eau Claire County. The policy change considered by the board tonight does not really include, well, actually does include an effort to call the vehicle owners at the point of where the car is going to be towed. But that's really all it does, and that's not very effective. Owners are probably not going to be around when you're trying to call them if their car is sitting on the side of the road. That certainly wouldn't have helped in my case. It wouldn't have helped in the case that Supervisor Chilson shared at the earlier meeting. And so the ordinance in front of you really doesn't address any of the critical concerns tonight. So you've got really three things. First, because there was no uniform fees for towing included in the policy revision, private towing companies will still continue to charge exorbitant towing fees, and there will continue to be no fair, consistent fee structure for your constituents who get towed. Second, related to the first item, this policy revision does not include a bidding system for private contractors to provide towing services. So at that point, there's no competition, and as a result, and probably more importantly, or most importantly, your towing companies are going to charge whatever they want to charge. And then third, while the daily rate is again set at $30 a day, and I commend you for that, not increasing that, the private towing companies will continue to disregard that as they have for the past several years because there is no oversight on that part of the policy. I was charged $45 a day. Other companies charge $50 a day. Nobody's going to abide by that $30 a day. And finally, there's no recourse for people who have their vehicles towed. And that was actually a suggestion by one of your supervisors, and it was a great suggestion. You need to have a policy of recourse. So if this ordinance passes tonight in its current form, this might be a little harsh, but the county will effectively be endorsing the flagrant abuse and corruption by these towing companies. Please don't do that. I ask that you not adopt this policy, which serves only as window dressing. Quite honestly, it doesn't even rise to the level of window dressing. And I ask you to direct the Sheriff's Department, the County Department of Transportation, the Treasurer's Office to work with the Board Administrative Committee to develop substantive policies which address the issues of a bidding system for contracted towing services, uniform towing costs, and finally, a structure which provides a system for recourse to your constituents. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Basting. Next is Richard Freitag, followed by Dave Zine.
Good evening. Richard Freitag, 1416 Cameron Street, Eau Claire, Wisconsin, 54703. Tonight is the meeting night for VFW Post 305. That's why none of our members are here other than myself. I stand before you this evening representing our 500 members of the Veterans of Foreign Wars Post 305 here in Eau Claire. We have a couple of questions with regard to the proposition to reallocate the funding for the Veterans Tribute Park towards some form of financing for or construction of housing for homeless veterans. I would ask if those proposing this idea have checked, as I did, the Federal Veterans Administration website and the State of Wisconsin website for veterans benefits. By so doing, it will become indeed evident that this situation is already being met by the federal and state programs. If in fact the state of Wisconsin and the Federal Veterans Administration programs are not adequate to fund these needs, I do not believe that the funds proposed for the Veterans Tribute Park, though substantial on a county level, would amount to more than a pimple compared to those sums budgeted by the state and federal governments. In addition to housing, there are self-help programs, education benefits, benefits for the disabled, loans to start and operate a business, on and on and on. Please take a look at that VA website. One of the more interesting ideas about the Veterans Tribute Park itself is that it will be a walkway through living history. Veterans will be on hand for school groups, youth organizations, and other interested parties to speak regarding their personal sacrifice as they serve their nation to keep our flag flying. Let me tell you about one such veteran from my post. In April of 1945, after having his ship blown out from under him, he was rescued at sea and sent back as an assault landing craft coxswain ferrying Marines ashore under fire at Okinawa. That was on his 18th birthday. Let's do the math. 1945 is 74 years ago. 74 plus 18 puts him at 92 years of age today, and he's one of the kids from that war. Our Korean War veterans, as kids, would be a mere 86. Next up would be Vietnam vets like me. I'm one of the kids. I'm 69 years old. I think it's time to get this project done, and so that the living veterans can yet tell their stories. And we are asking you to please continue on the right path, to do the right thing so that the park is built. Let's do it before it's too late. I want to thank you. And I want to ask if you have any questions.
Sorry, this is only for comment, not
very well.
dialogue.
In that case, then, I'd like to excuse myself. I'm going to meet with a group of heroes who need to have their story told. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fartag. Next is Dave Zine, followed by Rory Schutz.
Rory go first? Dave Zine's on his way. He's not here yet.
Please come forward.
Myself?
Are you Mr. Schutz?
No.
Oh, Mr. Schutz, then.
I'm Rory Schutte. I live at 406 Twin Oaks Drive, Altoona, Wisconsin. I am an adjunct for Chapter 21 Disabled American Veterans here in Eau Claire. And with the tribute being moved to Altoona and with the funding, I'm hoping it gets approved because that's in the county. And we have many veterans that will honor this along with our children. We have a good spot now, and we're sorry that Eau Claire did not recognize us down on 4th Street. But this is a learning tool for elementary all the way up to high school, because as they don't have this in their books today, so we need to educate these kids, and this is why the tribute is so important to us. And I thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Schutte. Next is Angela Thompson, followed by Angela Deutschlander.
Good evening. I'm Angela Thompson. I live at 281 South Victory Street in Fall Creek, Wisconsin, 54742. I am an Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran and a current serving member of the Wisconsin Army National Guard. And I'm currently serving as the Junior Vice Commander of VFW Post 7232 on West Folsom Street in the city of Eau Claire. On behalf of the post and its members, I would like to express our sincere gratitude for the financial support that the Eau Claire County Board has pledged to help construct the Veterans Tribute Trail. With Eau Claire County's continued support, we believe that the Tribute Trail will become one of Wisconsin's premier patriotic destinations. We strongly believe that Eau Claire County will be enhanced by this park. Even though the planned site has been moved from its original site 3 miles to the east, it will still be a very worthwhile addition to Eau Claire County. We believe that the new location along the Eau Claire River, where the cities of Eau Claire and Altoona meet, is an ideal place for this project. In addition to being a place for county veterans and their families to reflect and remember, it will be a valuable educational experience for others, as Mr. Freitag previously explained. We would like to express our desire for the county to continue its financial support for this important project. Thank you for the opportunity to address the board, and have a good evening.
Thank you, Ms. Thompson. Next is Angela Deutschlander, to be followed by Mr. Zine, who has now arrived. Mr. Zine.
Good evening, Eau Claire County Board Supervisors. I'm Angela Deutschlander, 4004 Clay Street in Eau Claire. I'm also Vice President of the Veterans Tribute Foundation. In November of 2018, we were approved to receive a generous donation from Eau Claire County towards a Veterans Tribute that will be built to honor the men and women that served from this county. The donation will specifically sponsor an honor mall that will be built as a main gathering space to honor the flag and hold veteran ceremonies. This is an important project as it also represents the appreciation and respect that the county and its officials show in acknowledgement of the proud history of service to the communities of the 18 cities, villages, and towns that make up this great county. The construction of the Honor Mall is being estimated at $650,000. This includes the U.S., Wisconsin, and POW flags, legacy stones, engraved Eau Claire County seal, along with 6 branch of service monuments and corresponding flags. The county's donation of $450,000, provided in 2 installments of $225,000, will go directly towards the mall construction and be named the Eau Claire County Veterans Tribute Honor Mall. The resolution to move the funds is merely a location change from the originally planned location in Eau Claire to Altoona. The Honor Mall will still be located in Eau Claire County, and we are simply asking for an approval to move the funds to be used for the same project plans as was previously presented and approved in the fall of 2018. In closing, we would like to ask for your continued support in going forward with the Eau Claire County Honor Mall as it has been proposed. The donation to the project is an important one and will benefit the county for generations to come. And I know you guys have seen this many times, but this would be what that donation is paying for. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Deutschlander. Mr. Zine, to be followed. Representative James, I'm going to ask you to be last and most important, eh? Okay. So, Mr. Zine.
These are Mr. Zine's handout for the county supervisors. How do you want to hand that?
I'm sorry, you have the handout?
Yeah, we have a handout too. Thank you very much. There's a couple handouts I have I wanted to share with everyone, especially the county board members and the staff. What you're going to see are a number of items. I took the big picture of the gestalt of all this means, this Veterans Tribute, this trail, this whole monument, what it means to the whole region and how the whole region can come together. You got such things as the Veterans Park in Arcadia, you got the High Ground, you got the Wisconsin Veterans Tribute, the Haley Peace Park. All these entities will focus in and bring attention to Eau Claire, the city and the region, and it's going to be good for conferences, conventions, it's going to be good for reunions, it's going to be good for just the whole region. But most important, it's going to add identity, it's going to add a substance to all these other entities and especially to Eau Claire. Also, you're going to get a standard Form 180. Ralph was passing it around. But a standard Form 180 is something that any descendant of a veteran, any ancestor, can order military medical and personnel records, ribbons and medals entitled to. If you got a great-grandfather, even back to the Civil War, World War I, you can order those records. And what it does is adds credence, it adds credibility, and you'll find out things on those medical records that you can't believe. Were he or she, were they subjected to radiation, asbestos, what kind of immunizations, what kind of shots, what kind of diseases might they have had that could be inherited? Ribbons and medals, battlefield experiences, unbelievable what you might find in that. The Eau Claire Veterans Tribute, located in Altoona, brings credence and vitality, and it brings something that future generations, not just us, not just our children's and our children's children, but future generations, we can inspire and they can learn by example. Something else you're going to get, it's on this, my little sheet here. Believe it or not, how many people know about Highway 12? The Iron Brigade Memorial Highway, the most famous, the most decorated unit in the Civil War was the Iron Brigade, the Black Hats, 2nd, 7th, and 9th Regiment, recruited from this very region. Many of them are buried here. 112 are buried in Augusta. 112 Civil War veterans. The Iron Brigade. Have we forgotten? Does anybody know Highway 53, what the official state statute Highway 53 is? It's Peace Memorial Highway. We don't like the word memorial. Memorial means a dead. Highway 53 is Peace Memorial Highway. What I included in this sheet, what if there is a big flag, Mark, you like this, you come up with it, a big flag, a Perkins or a Gander Mountain type flag, included the 5 branches of the military. This could be the largest military flags in the United States or the world. I'm not sure if the present ones, if any 5 fly at any location, a 6x10 or an 8x12. If it is a 6x10 or 8x12, we might have to add a few inches. We got to get a good seamstress. We'll have the largest military flag. Can you imagine it, seeing it from Highway 53? Can you imagine the credibility and the visibility, the attraction and the destination point? Can you imagine? Oh, just my time's almost up.
It is up.
It is up? Oh. Okay, Okay, I got a few more. County board members, if you get this. But last thing, Highway 10, Highway 53, right to the south, Vietnam veterans, Highway 29, World War I. How many people know all these different highways intersect? And Eau Claire can command attention to all those conflicts, all those veterans and their families and loved ones. God bless each and every one of you. I just come back from Madison, so I'm...
Thank you, Mr. Zine.
Bye-bye.
The next person up is Lee Hennick. Lee, there he is. Followed by Tom McCann. Todd McCann, sorry.
Shalom Aleichem. Zdravствуйте, Kamalatovich. Guten Abend, meine Freunde. My job in the Army and afterwards was to talk to hard people and go into places that good men fear to travel. When I joined, I was paid $124 a month. I was given $8 deployment for overseas pay and $65 for combat pay. That's what we were paid back in 1970, 71, 72. And according to Gloria Hochstein, who wrote me a nice letter.
Can I just get you to speak closer to the microphone so they can hear better?
Yeah. According to Gloria Hochstein, who I respect, she said 7% of the country, of the population, serve to do the other 93% of our service overseas. That's a pretty big load for a small amount of people. When I went to the first Veterans Tribute demonstration at Forest Park Maintenance Center, I saw a lot of fellow Democrats there, and they were talking about this as a tribute to war. I overheard some county supervisors, which I will not name because I don't like to shame people, talking about they regretted voting for the Tribute Trail money. And it was sad for me because it's a place of honor that I get to go talk to my brothers and sisters. I get to share their pain and let them share my pain and have a place that I can go and express my gratitude that I'm still here and they're not. This is about honoring our commitment to our veterans, caring for them enough to give them a place to rest in peace. And that's what I'd like to ask you, is to let our vets rest in peace. Just because we moved to Altoona doesn't mean that what you voted for the Tribute Trail doesn't mean you voted for the Tribute Trail only in Eau Claire. You voted it for the county of Eau Claire. And to the best of my knowledge, Altoona is part of Eau Claire. And it's about a place to honor the sacrifice that we did, not to celebrate war or to have petty bickerings over a peace trail or not a peace trail. This is about honoring the service of our few to the many. And I'd like you to consider continuing to honor that with your money. You've already voted for the money. It's already been allocated. Changing it now gives a clear demonstration to veterans on how you feel. Right now, vets feel challenged in Eau Claire. When I got out of my last deployment and retired in June of 16, I started helping Emily Berge get elected. And I come in contact with a lot of people in the party and I was asked many times by good, educated people, I'm really surprised that you're a Democrat because you're a veteran. That upset me and hurt me. It's like saying, I'm really surprised you're smart because you're a woman. You know, it's like how we treated the black guys back in the 50s and 60s. I have advocated to every politician in the last election to show up for veterans, to please come to the Eau Claire picnic and listen to a speech. I gave a speech, not this summer, last summer, on veterans. and there wasn't anybody but the Republicans there. I've advocated for our local politicians to show up at different events. Every year they have an event in Eagles Club about Vietnam veterans, and there was probably 1,000 people there this spring. Mr. Petrick showed up, and none of the Democrats did. I have advocated till I'm blue in the face to show up. Please, show respect. Show up like you do for Juneteenth. Show up like you do for the gay rights events and the women's events and the labor events. Treat us like you treat everybody else.
Excuse me. Would you draw your comment to a close, please?
Okay. Thank you for listening. Sorry if I get carried away a little bit, but it's close to my heart on honoring my fellow vets who sacrificed and being able to have us sit down with them and just say, hey, brother, hey, sister, how you doing?
Thank you. The next name I have is Todd. Todd McCain? Not here? Okay. The next speaker is Tammy Smith Schroeder, followed by Representative James.
My name is Tammy Smith Schroeder, and I reside at E15810 County Road O in Augusta. And I'm here to talk in favor of our rezoning request. Don's sister would like to build a house on the home farm. Therefore, we need to rezone a small portion of the land from AP to AR, Ag Preservation, to Ag Residential. The majority of this land is part of the original building site on the farm, so we're not removing a lot of ag out of production. My biggest reason for speaking here is that I want to acknowledge that we feel a little bit hypocritical that we're talking out of both sides of our mouth, because most of the time when we come to the county board, we're talking about ag preservation and preserving agricultural land, and now we're asking that a little bit be taken out so Don's sister can have a house built on the farm. The old house that's there will be torn down. Anyone driving by the property would not realize that there's any zoning been changed. It's going to look the same to everybody that's in the neighborhood, and I just request that our zoning application be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Representative James.
Well, good evening, supervisors. It's a pleasure for me to be here tonight, and what a way to start out the evening with a moment of reflection from Supervisor Anton speaking about President Lincoln. I find that very interesting due to the fact that I just came back from Washington, D.C. last night, and the most memorable experience that I had talking with my wife on the plane was the Lincoln Memorial. That was the highlight of even visiting the U.S. Capitol and sitting on the House floor. The Lincoln Memorial is remarkable. And then coming to listen to our Senator Dave Zien, it's remarkable. His enthusiasm and passion for the Veterans Tribute is amazing, something that I also support. Obviously, the location coming from Altoona. Do I have to say my address?
It would be good.
Okay, sorry. Jesse James, 2511 Botsford Avenue, Altoona, Wisconsin, 54720. I apologize. I get too excited. And this is my first opportunity to meet all of you and say hello, because every Tuesday we have caucus down in Madison, and the schedule prevents us from getting back home sometimes, because then Wednesdays is usually our typical meeting day. So that's what I'm learning. So I want to take advantage of the opportunity being here tonight. Some of the committees that I've been appointed to in this new legislative role includes being the vice chair of family law, children and families, military and veteran affairs, corrections, prevention, substance abuse, small business development, and environment. So these are some of my heart passions and some of the things that I campaigned on, which the top three were education, which budget got approved, and we saw a large education increase. Transportation. I know, John, I'm sorry we didn't get everything that Eau Claire County wanted, but it's a work in progress still. And then obviously anything with drugs, the meth and opioid epidemic that exists today, which I seen Kim earlier today at Davie Center at Zorn Arena for our opioid collaboration event. I'm also assigned to the Speaker's Task Force on Suicide. And suicide is just not about our kids anymore. It's about our veterans. It's about our farmers, which is the #1 population in our state that's committing suicide right now. It's about our first responders, our police, fire, EMS, and even our corrections officers, including our jailers right here in Eau Claire County. They have a 2.5 times more % increase of committing suicide over our law enforcement officers. So this is some of the interesting stuff that I get to pursue and look into. And then another alarming statistic is our doctors, which is extremely, you'd think with all the schooling and everything that they go through the education, but they're facing burnout. So these are some of the things that we get to look at as a legislator now, some of my passions that I'm very excited to be a part of, and I'm enjoying the opportunity serving you all, being the 68th Assembly District Representative. And I know you have a lot on the agenda tonight, so I'm going to close with God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. James. I have no other names on this sign-up sheet for people to speak. Is there any other member of the public who wishes to present a comment? Any other member? Seeing none, thank you very much. We will proceed on to the next item on our agenda, reports to the county board under 2.04.320. We've already removed the Alice active shooter training from the agenda. So next will be presentation by Brock Guyan from Clifton Larson Allen regarding our 2018 audit.
Good evening. My name is Brock Guyan, principal in charge of your annual external audit, and I'm going to cover some of the highlights from that, and you should have hopefully a summary. Is that true? Got a summary for people to follow along. You've got several reports as a result of the annual audit. The one you hear from me about is the summary. It's one we put together that condenses everything in just a few pages. And I won't go through everything exactly, but we'll try to talk about everything that you need to hear from your auditor. So if we'll get into it, and we've got copies available. I'll just start right here on page 1. A link? Okay.
Yeah, they linked to it. They're linked to it.
They got a link. Perfect. I don't know if it's going to be on the screen or not, but all right. So the first part I'm going to cover pretty quick. The one that talks about the audit opinions and internal controls and stuff like that, and then I'll get into some of the numbers.
We're going to try to bring it up on the screen.
Sure, no problem. No problem. Yep. Basically, first acknowledge your staff, though. Here at the county, there's some challenges in the audit this year, just from a technical standpoint. There was a new standard. You guys here draft your own financial statement, the 80-page booklet, which seems to grow every year because of new standards or whatever. That's very, very uncommon. So that's just a testament to your staff. They've done a very nice job pulling things together for the audit this year. We met with Budget and Finance last week and reviewed this all in detail. So again, talking about the results, the opinions we've issued quickly here. The booklet itself, there's a couple pages in here called the Audit Opinion, Auditor's Report. That's the one from us telling you if it's correct or not. And we've issued an unmodified opinion. That's what you strive to achieve. That means all the amounts and disclosures are materially correct. You'll find 2 new paragraphs in there this year, some additional wording. One talks about a change in accounting principles. So when a new standard comes down, something I talked about here just a second ago, it changes the presentation, and you have to restate the beginning balance, what was reported at the end of 17 in certain areas. So that's all that paragraph means. The other one was a change in loans receivable. So here you brought on some activity on your books, a revolving loan program, which hadn't been there in the past. The state required you to take that on this year from the Housing Authority. So that's newly reported in your documents there. And of course, we restated the beginning balance to get it on the books initially, so only the current year activity shows up where it belongs here this year. All right, internal controls. Spent a lot of time on this in the past. I'm just going to talk real briefly on these things. There are only 2 items to report this year. That's very good. One is material audit adjustments. To give you some perspective, I think several years back, the first year we were here with you guys, I think there was close to 60 or 70 journal entries we proposed to your books to get them in line to where they needed to be. This year there were several again, but really the only ones that triggered this finding, there's only 5. So there's been significant improvement. There's a lot of work that goes into reviewing, well, what are the adjustments that we're proposing each year? They're learning from that. They're taking on those entries, so they post them themselves the following year and so on. So this one is insight to where maybe we can get rid of that one going forward, unless something unusual pops up, which is always a possibility. The other one, limited segregation of duties. Again, we spent a lot of time on this in the past. There have been certain improvements that were made during the audit year 2018. You saw department involvement in the disbursement process, some different changes in reviews and approvals, and then separation of who can create a vendor and who can make the payable transactions, who can post those, right? So those are all important. Those all help improve. This is an ongoing continuous improvement type of a scenario. There's still areas that need to be addressed yet, and finance is working on those currently. All right, so if you're following along, you can skip ahead a few pages because I'm not going to talk about the next few there. We're going to go to page 7. And here's where we start getting into the numbers. The first thing we're looking at here is your general fund. And when I look at that, the first thing I look to on this page is the second to last row. It's called change in fund balance. That's the results for the year. And you'll see a negative $1,647,000. So there it is. So if you go to the very bottom of that page for a second, you'll see what I'm talking about there. The second to last row, $1.6 million, that's a negative. So you had a loss for the year, you reduced your fund balance. So when you're looking at the top of the screen there, you'll see the fund balance section. Fund balance is your reserves at the end of any given year. And not all reserves are equal, so we carve that off and put them in different buckets. First one, non-spendable. It's delinquent taxes. You haven't collected those yet. It's inventory and prepaids. You've already spent the money, so you can't spend it again. So we set that aside and we call them non-spendable items. Some dollars are restricted by an external party, so we set that aside. And then you assign some dollars. In your case, you have a budget shortfall in the next year, or 2019. So what you do is you can set aside some of your reserves because you know you're going to use that to fill that gap in your budget in that following year. So that's what the $755,000 is. So what's left is that last row. A little tough to see on there, but it is shaded, maybe possibly in your version on the screen there. It's the unassigned fund balance. That's the one we key in on. That's the one we look at every year and we talk about. You probably talk about a little bit during budget as well as far as targets go. That ended up at $10,133,000. So we take that number, we compare it to expenditures a couple rows down, that $35.1 million, and we come up with that ratio at the bottom, and that's how we track how it's trending. How are you doing, and how does that compare to other counties and other prior years there? And you can see the trend has decreased. It dropped to 28.9%, and that can be as obviously as expected because of the loss for the year, the $1.6 million. So if we talk about that loss again just briefly, we've got a couple things in mind here. Your general operations for the general fund actually turned out pretty well. You were above budget on revenues. You were under budget on expenses. The issue came in with the transfers. So the general fund, that supports all our other funds, right? And you have, and I'll talk about this on the next page, but you were $2.1 million over budget on your transfers out to help other funds. So that's what drove this number down a little bit in your percentage. You've got a policy to maintain between 20 and 30%, so you're still within that parameter. We talk about a rule of thumb of a minimum. I don't necessarily have a range target typically when I preach to my clients. It's more of you want a minimum of at least 25 to 33%. That's only 3 or 4 months worth of reserves, and it can dry up pretty quick. We've seen that in other clients. So that's why our preference would to see kind of a minimum there as your target. The average for the 11 that my office works with here in Northwest Wisconsin, the 11 counties, is about 48%. So it's kind of on the lower end of the counties up here in this corner of the state, and it is pretty far off from that average. So let me skip to the next page quick, and then I'm gonna circle back here and make one more comment. But before I do that, I want to talk about a couple of your other funds here, and one in particular, Human Services. I believe there's been some discussion already, so you're probably aware of this. This is where it shows up. It's a separate fund. What you're seeing here is several other funds that the county maintains and just the year-end reserves. That's it. I don't have the full balance sheet up here. You'll see that there's a negative $1,285,000 there. In the last couple of years, it's been zero. So in 2016 is when you started this policy of basically clearing out the HS fund. That's very typical of a lot of counties within the state. They clear it to zero with a transfer either in or out from the general fund, depending on how the year turned out. Typically, it's a transfer in is what we see, but we do have a county that had a transfer the other way this year. So it's not completely out of the realm of possibility. It can go either way. The difference here this year, though, and why there's a negative is because the way HS and Finance wanted to handle some funding you anticipate to receive at the end of 19. So you run programs during 2018, you're under audit, and there are funding sources where you don't actually see the cash come in until almost 12 months later, right? So it's a timing issue. It's a bit of a problem for counties to deal with from a cash flow standpoint. But what this means, why there's a negative there is there's a decision made to say, okay, we calculated an amount we expect to receive in December of 2019. As an auditor, I can't let you recognize that as revenue to get rid of the negative completely and record a receivable like you would maybe on a for-profit company or full accrual. So the decision was, okay, let's not completely wipe it out with the general fund transfer. Let's leave the deficit there. We anticipate we're going to collect that and recognize that revenue in 19. That's why that's still there. Now, you have to keep in mind, that's you transferred in $2.4 million, almost $2.5 million from the general fund to cover the deficit to this point. So that, in addition to the 1.2 or almost 1.3 million, you've got a total loss or deficit that resulted for the year of $3,778,000 in HS. That was the total operating loss for the year. Now, if we take a second, scroll back up to that prior page, I just want to talk about the impact there in the general fund. Had you, because I don't want to sugarcoat this by just keeping that deficit over there. I want to make sure everybody understands what this means. So if the full transfer would have been made to cover the complete deficit for the year, brought HS to zero, you would have had to transfer over another $1,285,000 out of the general fund, driving that loss a little bit lower. It would have brought your percentage down to 25.2%. So there's the perspective I wanted to make. You can look at it different ways, of course, but the full transfer would have brought that down. Any questions on any of that? Did I explain that clear enough? It's kind of a lot to absorb there, but all right. Any questions?
No.
All right. So then we move back to the next page, and I'll continue on with the other funds. Probably move down to debt service. Item number 3 there. A bit of a bright spot continues to be. Now you have some reserves sitting here from debt premiums that you've collected and from some over levy in this fund in prior years. You have $3.4 million sitting here. It is restricted to be used towards principal and interest. You have outstanding debt that this will be applied to, but it gives you flexibility in your future budgets. You can take this and apply it at your discretion in an effort to reduce the amount of levy you want to apply to your debt service fund. This fund did pay $9.3 million of principal and interest during the year, so there's a lot of activity that goes through there. On the bottom, capital projects fund, here's one to keep your eye on a little bit. A lot of activity went through this one as well. So you issued $10 million worth of general obligation debt during the year. You transferred $6 million of that over to highway for them to use for projects. You had some other revenue sources. This fund, your capital projects fund, incurred $3,279,000 of expenses of capital items, so purchases, trucks, vehicles, items like that. That came out of this fund. You see there is a deficit here. This has been carried forward for a number of years here, and there's a bit of timing play in this as well, where when you do finally spend down that $10 million you issued during the year, you're going to have a larger deficit, right? Because you haven't funded the prior year deficit. What you've done is you've issued $10 million. You plan to spend that for specific purposes. So then you'll end up at a larger deficit than what's sitting there right now. When all is said and done. Now, I do know finance is looking at this. They're working at finding solutions for you guys to take a look at in your budgets going forward and to pick away at that. All right, next page. We change our thinking here a little bit. We get into full accrual, more business type accounting, if you will. Your highway department and your airport fund on this page, they measure things in a different basis of counting. So we look at things a little bit differently. So at the bottom of the highway department section, so the very last row there, I think you got to go down just a little hair, a little bit further. Yep, right there, right above that 3.99 at the bottom. That's your operating results. So you look there, was there a profit or loss out of this fund for the year? And here you had positive results of $124,000. That's actually in spite of the number above it. That's a change in accounting principle I mentioned right up on the offset. So that in changing that accounting principle, you had to adopt a loss of $125,000 in this particular type of fund. So that's its allocation of the impact here. So even with that, though, there was positive results, and you can see that's a positive trend even the last 4 years. The bottom of the airport fund, which is next. Same type of concept we're looking at here, your change in net position. You do see a negative here of $109,000. That's quite a bit better financially than the trend had been, but you do have to keep in mind in an airport fund, it's very, very heavy infrastructure based, right? You got a lot of assets sitting there. Those depreciate. So that depreciation hit every year is pretty heavy. You anticipate a loss every year. So it's not unusual to see the numbers you have on there because this huge asset is being whittled away over time. The reason why it's less of a deficit than the trend there is you did have some capital contributions. That's the revenue to this fund. So when you get $700,000 coming in of capital being contributed, that's a revenue source for it. So it offsets that depreciation loss for the year. Nothing unusual otherwise, and the reserves are good. The last page I'm going to cover then, page 10. The last fund is your risk management fund. This is where your insurance is handled, your workers' comp, property and casualty, general liability. What we do here is we look again at that change in net position row. You see a negative $61,000. That tells you whether or not the premiums that are being charged for these activities to the rest of the county funds is covering the claims or not. And that has been deficit the last 2 years. So we look at that, we monitor it. This fund does have sufficient reserves to handle operations going into the near future here, though, even though there was $61,000 loss this year. Lastly, on a summary of your long-term debt here. This is just all your long-term obligations. As I mentioned, you issued $10 million of general obligation debt. You repaid $7.3 million. So the net of that obviously is why this number increased a couple $1 million over the prior year. Halfway down this section, you'll see 2 rows, WRS pension asset liability and state life insurance. The state life insurance is actually that piece that's new this year, that new accounting principle. You can see that came in, you're bringing on a liability, hence the negative number in highway, and that came through there. That was that portion of it. But the total liability brought on the books is almost $1.5 million because of this plan that's administered by the state. WRS there, this looks a little odd, but this is the nature. It's the same thing for every government that participates. In 2015, which is the first year you started reporting this, the plan administered, the pension plan by the state was an overall overfunded. So everybody brought on an asset. The next 2 years, it turned the other way, $4 billion, and the plan was underfunded for 2 years. So that's why you had a liability reported. Now here in 18, it swung the other way again. So that's just the ins and outs. It is impacting your financial results in those full accrual funds. But just so understanding what that trend means there. And then the very last comment then is on the bottom. That's a measurement of how much tax-supported debt you can hold at any given point in time. There's a statutory limit there, and you're at 19.5% of that limitation. So you do have some flexibility. I don't think it would be practical to borrow 100% because the mill rates would rise pretty high, but it does. You do have some flexibility there. So again, I went through a lot of this very quickly. Any kind of questions I can try to answer for you?
Yes, I have one question.
I'm sorry, Mr.
Chilson.
Mr. Chilson first, Supervisor Chilson, followed by Supervisor Moritz.
Thank you.
Followed by Supervisor Pagonis.
So Brock, I have a question related to the numbers and the percentages that you gave us tonight. Mm-hmm. In your presentation, you said if we would have paid out the additional $1.285 million out of the unassigned fund balance, it would have brought us to a percentage, and I didn't write it down quick enough, it was 25 something.
Yep.
You said in your presentation that you recommend that we hold anywhere between 25 to 33% in the unassigned fund balance to cover general expenditures.
Mm-hmm.
If we move forward and just used a figure of $2 million for 2019 related to the general unassigned fund balance, I didn't have the numbers quick enough to do it, but that puts me in a percentage, I would guess that we're probably going to be in a 21 to 22% percentage of unassigned fund balance to general expenditures. We had a discussion the other day when you gave us this presentation at Finance. What are the implications? When I asked you the other day, you said we could have problems if we got into the low 20s. Mm-hmm. What kind of problems are we talking about?
Yep. Well, this is what we observe in other clients, and this is not unique to counties. This is villages, schools, cities. But when you start getting into that realm under 25%, and that's why we preach the percentage, is the biggest one is cash flow. And it's emphasized in a county. Your cash flow throughout the year is has peaks and valleys, and you've got to protect for those low points. So what a fund balance at the end of the year allows you to do is carry yourself through those low points. Typically, doesn't always happen, but for the most part, we see that is the case. Now, what happens if you have cash flow problems? You can't pay vendors timely, possibly. You might have to short-term borrow. Then you're incurring additional interest costs just to pay the bills. That certainly doesn't help your expense situation either. So that's probably the biggest one that's immediate. Another big one, though, is potential impact your bond rating. So you guys issue debt on a regular basis, right? You're incurring costs associated with that lending. And when you have a drop in your bond rating, your interest costs go up because you're considered riskier of a person or as an entity. So that could, again, it doesn't help your situation. You're incurring more interest costs just to pay the same amount of debt service. There's also, I suppose, with the general fund, it is the backup for every other fund. So if another activity goes south, the general fund is pretty much the only one available to step in and make it right. You're really limiting your options there when you start whittling away at your reserves and your fund balance, right? So if you had a change in programming, emergency reserves, whatever the case might be, just like HS, covering deficits, you're just limiting the situation there if it gets too low. And those are the primary kind of troublesome points. So hopefully I answered your question.
Supervisor Moritz.
Yes. The $3.7 million deficit for Health and Human Services, that's not cut in stone yet. That can be less than that by the end of 2019. Is that correct?
No.
Thank you.
Right. Okay. The number is what it is at the end of 12/31. It's a firm cutoff. The recognition is consistent with every other county in the state. For these programs I was talking about the timing on, you just as elected as an organization not to transfer the full amount to cover that deficit. The deficit is what it was. Yep.
Supervisor Pagonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Supervisor Chilson pretty much asked my question using actual numbers. So on page 7 of your report, you went through the percentages, and notably from the end of 2016 to the end of 2018, the fund balance actually went down by approximately $2 million. And now we see it going down a second time by approximately $2 million. And so the additional degradation, if I understand you correctly, it would implicate, when you say it implicates our cash flow, I trust that means our ability to pay our bills on a month-to-month basis.
Yep.
And so how would we as a county respond to that? Would we have to start looking at some type of short-term borrowing, and how does that even play into things?
Yes, absolutely. So if you got to that situation, and I know we talked about this at a finance as well, and I don't think I mentioned it here, but I mean, the rate at which the general fund is trending, it's not sustainable. It's simply not. I mean, you're going to have to do something at some point. This will have to turn around to a certain extent, whether it's, operationally within the general fund or these transfers to other funds, that type of thing. But when it comes to if you get to that point where you're running into cash flow problems, you're going to have to work with your treasurer then to secure some sort of short-term financing. We usually see that through a line of credit at a bank, or different organizations issue more longer-term one-year kind of debt issuances to that you get the proceeds at a certain point in the year, and then 12 months later you repay it. Those type of situations. There's options out there available to you, but again, you're incurring interest costs when you're doing that.
But it's not a pretty picture.
It's usually not good, right?
If I could ask just one other follow-up question to Supervisor Moritz. He asked if the $3.7 million DHS deficit, I guess I'm not exactly sure how he phrased it. Isn't it correct that in your presentation, we're expecting to get approximately $1.3 million in December 2019? So the actual deficit is closer to 2.49.
Well,
2,490,000.
That was the transfer, right, and that's why it was left in there. There's an expectation you'll receive that cash, recognize the revenue associated with that. The problem with looking at it as a differently from a cutoff perspective than the way it's reflected at the end of 2018 is you've got the same trend every single year. So what you're incurring for expenses in 19, you're not going to get till December of 2020. So now you're just pushing back that deficit 12 months.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I see no other questions. Thank you, Mr. Cahan.
Yep, all set.
Oh, sorry. Supervisor Wilkie.
One request, towards the end of your presentation at Budget and Finance, I ask you to list number 1 and number 2 things that we should be concerned or alarmed about and pay attention to and address. What would be your recommendation to this board?
Okay. Been to a lot of meetings, so I got to remember what we talked about. One was the HS, I believe. The HS deficits, we got to deal with that. I think the other one was segregation of duties,
yes,
right?
Was.
Yeah. So that one, well, I kind of went over it pretty quickly there. That continues to be a significant area. There's a lot of dollars. There's a lot of areas. There's still a lot of work to be done when it comes to segregation of duties. So we don't want to forget about it. Just the messaging here tonight was a little different. We were focusing on a couple different things, but certainly that's important. And I do know your staff is working pretty diligently on that aspect of it already. So if you have questions on what they're doing specifically, you can direct those to the finance.
Can I follow up on that, Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir.
On the segregation duties, you also did express to us that there has been a lot of strides and accomplishments made on that, but that is something that is ongoing and is going to continue to be worked on. And you did express concern about the DHS curve, I think you called it, that we're on, that trajectory is not good. But I'm hopeful that this board has been getting very serious about trying to address that issue.
Thank you. I see no other requests to speak. Thank you, Mr. Cahan.
Yep, my pleasure.
Next is a second quarter financial report by Finance Director Kirk. And you have a link to the PowerPoint presentation. Are we putting that up also?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
Oops. Okay. Yeah, that's not the...
That's Mr. Z.
Got the wrong input. Okay, I'm here this evening to provide an overview of the Q2 financial activity. The real intent is to provide some context to where we're at halfway through 2019, both comparable to the budget as well as comparable to 2018 as for comparative results. One thing I want to mention is, all the numbers we're going to talk about are actuals. And I want to make sure to emphasize that excuse me, there are some departments that DHS is an example, because of the lags that occur in the revenue, many times they're also including projections into their estimates and giving a forecast. But what we're looking at right now is what's been actually recorded in our general ledger system, our financial system, through the second quarter of the year. So. Okay, at a really high level, year to date, the Q2 financials are slightly better than what they were on a comparable pace, comparable to 2018. At a high level, we had a deficit through the first half of the year of $5.7 million, comparable to $7.3 million for the first half of 18. I would not get too caught up, if you will, in the exact number. It's really more of a relativeness of some improvement in terms of where we're at for the first part of the year. It's really difficult as you get through the first half of the year because there are quite a few lags that occur in revenues, particularly as I mentioned, DHS is a good example, ADRC, and some of those that get grant funding. So it's not at all unusual for us to have a deficit through the first half of the year. Good that we're in a better position, at least relative, if you will, year to year, but again, I would not focus too much on the particular number in itself. So we're going to look at a couple different things when we're reviewing the Q2 financials. So the first thing we're going to talk about are revenues. And we're going to talk about revenues at somewhat of a high level. We're going to talk about, what's the source of the revenues, and again, how are we comparing 2019 to 2018. And then we're going to talk about expenditures, and there we're going to take kind of two different views. We're going to take a view at a program level, and then we're going to talk a little bit about categorically where are those expenditures occurring, because there is a different perspective, if you will, depending on which of those two views you're taking. So operationally, you can see, again, we are a little bit better than where we were a year ago. The upper right-hand corner, I talk about operational revenues, and you'll probably hear me talk about operational, if you will, both with revenue and expenditures as we go through the year. And the reason I want to talk about it from that kind of context is, in this case, operational revenues would be looking at the county revenues, but taking out things like the internal service fund, fund balances, and bond proceeds. And the reason to take those out and have a little different perspective is you get more at what's really operationally happening within the department. I hesitate to say controllable expenditures, if you will, but certainly more representative of what's going operationally in the department. So I think there were some good things that we've had in the first half of the year, and there's some things that we need to pay attention to in the revenue side. So again, on the bullets on the right-hand side, so year-to-date through Q2, we are about 39.6% of our budgeted revenues. That's a little bit higher, about 5% higher than we were in 2018. Certainly, we've had some additional revenues that have occurred, vehicle registration fee. We have a few other things that just from a timing perspective are coming in favorable, so that kind of leads to that a little bit. We also had an increase that was driven in the highway department. As we all remember, it was a difficult winter maintenance season, and while the county had difficult maintenance season, the work that the highway department does for the state in terms of maintaining the roads, we do get reimbursement for. So while we had some additional expenses related to that, we also had some additional revenue. So the revenues generated from the public charges for services, they are running a little bit behind. If you see that line, it's about middle in that chart. It's at 46%. again, one of those areas that we just have to take a look at and monitor, particularly in Q3. It's, again, not totally unusual that we'd be a little bit behind through the first half of the year. We would expect Q3 to rebound fairly significantly. So I would say when I'm speaking to you in Q3, if we're not seeing that rebound, then that might be a little bit of pause for concern, I guess, as we head through the end of the year. And sales tax is one I want to talk a little bit about. So sales tax is one we really have to pay attention to. So to refresh your memory, we collected about $11 million of sales tax in 2018. That was about $800,000 more than we budgeted, which was good news. We entered into the 2019 budget and we set that budget at about $10.8 million, largely based on what we saw for 2018 activity. So sales tax lags a couple months, so we're a little bit early into the sales tax collections. Good news is May was a record-setting month for the month of May in terms of sales tax collections. So that's the good news. The bad news is when we look at it from where we at on an average basis through the first 5 months of collections, we're looking at more along the lines of a trend that we had in 2016 and not 2018. Okay, so that is something we're going to have to pay attention to. Obviously, sales tax collections are highly correlated with economic activity, economic environment. We all know what that a little bit of what that environment is like right now. So we will have to certainly pay attention to that in Q3. And I think not only where we're at for the 2019 budget, but then what should we be assuming for the 2020 budget when it comes to sales tax and seeing what happens there. There is one line on here that I want to point out, fines and forfeitures. It's a rather smaller line, if you will. We had a budget of $290,000 for the year. We've already exceeded the budget through the first 2 quarters of the year. So you can call that good news, bad news. Good news is fines and forfeitures are up. That's positive for us. We will see growth in that area in your 2020 budget submission. So that's good news that we are going to see an uptick in that particular revenue line. So if you, again, kind of go down to the bottom of that chart and you kind of look at it from that, I guess, operational perspective, you'll see that we're, again, about 5% higher in terms of where we're at with the budget versus where we were a year ago. So we've collected over $40 million versus, 36.9 roughly in the same period in 2018. Any questions on the revenue?
I see no request to speak.
Yes.
Oh, sorry, Supervisor Dunning. Please use your keypads to indicate request to speak.
I didn't know he was going to ask for questions.
These are what we're discussing.
Right. Going back to the sales tax, when it was authorized by federal law to collect sales tax for out-of-state purchases, how are we able to determine if we are getting our fair share of the out-of-state sales tax to coming into us? Because anything that's bought outside of the state before that law changed, we lose the sales tax on. Now we have the opportunity to get it back. Are we actually collecting that sales tax?
I would say the short answer is I don't know, and I quite honestly not so sure the Department of Revenue knows either. Sales tax, if you're deal with sales tax at all, sales tax is a self-reported tax. I don't know that they would actually be able to tell you the source of that collection necessarily, or whether it was through an internet sales or not. So short answer is no. I have no idea, quite honestly. Again, our sales tax is running a little bit less, again, on average. May was a really good month for us. We had over $1 million sales tax collected in the month of May. Again, that was the highest May we've had it since we've had sales tax. So one could say that's, encouraging sign. But because sales tax is so volatile and you're never exactly sure what it's going to be, we tend to look at what we've seen on average. And so from a monthly average, we are running behind what we would need for, 2019. Whether that's related internet sales, I cannot can't comment because I don't have that data, and I've asked for it, but quite honestly, I'm not sure it exists.
Seeing how our sales our seasonal sales were down somewhat this past year due to the loss of our major anchor stores, that could be significant in years to come. So.
Yeah. The one other thing I would say about sales tax, for your memory, last year there was a sales tax holiday that occurred in August, if you remember. There was not a sales tax holiday this year, okay? I'm not sure how much we may have had an impact from that holiday, but there was not a sales tax holiday this year for that. So.
I see no other request to speak. Thank you very much for your report.
I'm not done yet.
Sorry.
I'm just getting warmed up. So. Okay, so now we'll talk about expenditures. And again, we're going to talk about it from two perspectives. One from a program perspective and then one from a category. If you recall, when we do the budget process, we do categorize our expenditures by program. Okay, and we've developed the quarterly reporting that is out on Report Central by program, and it's all again to align with the way we're doing the budget, align with the way we're talking about how we're spending money and allocating funds within the county, and so I will continue to kind of report that. It's important that we look at it more than one way. Okay, so because it does tell a different story, and we'll talk about that as we walk through this. So if you look at the program expenditures year to date, all of them are below 50% of the budget for the first half of the year. Okay, so on the onset, that's a favorable setting. That's again assuming that all our spending is linear. It's not always linear, but again, it's a relative measure, right? We're still new into our reporting process. I've been inundating you with a number of reports out in Report Central, and you've seen it, and we will continue to refine our reporting, and some of that reporting will be, again, looking at where we were a year ago, so we can start to understand, is there that seasonality that occurs, and so what should we expect as we're halfway through the year, okay? Two areas are running the highest on the higher side. The health area, and again, the health area includes a number of things. It does have, DHS is in that category, but there were many other things. There's ADRC, there's the health department, there's a number of other things. So it's not just that. If that question came up, because it actually came up to me earlier. And then the leisure section. And the leisure section includes where the library funding is. Okay, so that's running a little bit higher because we tend to pay a higher amount of those library charges in the first half of the year. So that's helping drive that up a little bit. Again, if I take kind of an operational perspective, if you will, and we exclude debt service and capital projects, then we're actually running below where we were a year ago at this time. That's those bottom two lines where it says excluding debt service and capital projects. Again, I kind of view those as being, I guess I'll call less operational, if you will. Through the first half, we had $43.7 million of expenditures, about 45% of the budget. Q2, we were at 44.2. So not a hugely significant reduction, but still $500,000 less year to year for the same period. So, okay. Any questions on program expenditures? Okay. Expenditures by category. Hopefully you are bringing this up because I know it'd be difficult to read here, but we did put the links out there earlier. So this is where we're going to look at how are we spending our money? What are those categories? First and foremost is personnel. Personnel is by far our largest expenditure category. So, nothing strange there at all. We're running at 41.8%, about 42% through the first half of the year. That's pretty much where we were last year about at this time. We had approximately 40 vacancies that existed at the end of June. Again, relatively speaking, that's about where we were at the end of Q2 of 18. So we tend to hover, or have seemed to hover, between 30 and 40 vacancies. So that's kind of very typical, at least for us, over this last year. Again, our overtime, which is a component of the personnel, We have detailed personnel reports out on Report Central. I think, you certainly have seen those before and encourage you to look at those. Overtime, actually, if you exclude highway, again, it was a difficult winter, and so highway was way over their budget. If you exclude the highway, then overtime for the rest of the county, we're at 34% of the budget through the first half. So again, I think that's an encouraging statistic as well. So that would bode well that we potentially could be under budget in overtime. The next big category is contracted services. We're at 58.7% of the budget. We are running a little bit high in contracted services. That's an area that we, as an expenditure category, need to make sure we kind of keep our eyes on, if you will, as we continue through the rest of the year. So what's driving that? Well, we are seeing increases in the activity to support CCS, alternate care, adult protective services. Important point there is we've talked a number of times about CCS. We know CCS is at least a reimbursable. If we see an increase in contracted services, we will be expecting an increase in revenue then to correspond with that. We're also seeing it still in alternate care and adult protective services. I will also just say it's, again, not always just the pure numbers of individuals that have placements. It's also the mix of those placements. We have mixes of higher costing placements, if you will, come into play just as much, if not more, than just the absolute number of placements that we have. So we have to keep an eye on that. A positive note is the out-of-county inmate housing costs. I think you may have heard this in another report, but just to reemphasize, through Q2 it was $37,000. If you remember, we had a lot of concern heading into the budget process about what that would look like based on last year. We spent $174,000. Last year at this same period, we were at $96,000. Okay, so that is an unbudgeted expense. That was an expense we talked about in the budget process and was not budgeted. So anything that occurs there is an unbudgeted expense. The fixed charges are a little bit high at 59% of the budget. Again, that's really attributed to the highway equipment rental, if you will, directly again related to, or most directly related to winter maintenance. And again, that was one, if you go back to what we talked about, the maintenance revenue, the highway also has additional maintenance revenue. So even though we're a little bit higher in that category, it's not as concerning to me because I believe there's offsetting revenue to compensate for it. And lastly, overall supplies and services are 34.8% of the budget. That is down from almost 52% that we had through Q2. So I'd say that's definitely an encouraging statistic as well, if we can kind of continue to maintain that. Any questions on the expenditures by category?
I see no request to speak.
Okay. Last slide. So how do I sum this up? Well, overall, I'd say, for the first half of 2019, we are better than we were at the same period a year ago. I would take that as a grain of salt. It's a point in time. We've gone through half of the year. We will have a lot of activity that will occur in the second half of the year. Okay. While I'd say it's cautiously optimistic, we do have a lot of activity that will occur. As part of the budget process, we are collecting the estimates of where departments believe they will end 2019, so we will be rolling that up. We'll be also having that as part of a discussion we do with finance and budget. We'll use that to talk about what we believe the impact could be to the general fund balance. That very same unassigned general fund balance that Mr. Guyan was just speaking about. We look at that. We look at what we think that projection would be. And as we move through that, we could also share that with all the board and put that on Report Central as well, so you can all see what are departments telling us or where they think they'll land for 2019. Again, on the revenue side, we are slightly ahead. We do have to, again, pay attention in Q3 to sales tax. Make sure that we have continue to have strong collections. Make sure that May wasn't just an unusual occurrence, and that we continue to have strong collections in Q3 to kind of get us back on track. And then the public charges for services, I did mention they're running a little bit behind. But when I had the discussions with the department heads, it does appear that in those areas, they expect it to rebound in Q3. So at this point, I'm not as concerned about that, but it is an area that we need to keep our eyes on. And then lastly, the expenditures, if you look at it again by program, we'd say that we're relatively in line with expectations. Again, most of them we're well below the 46, 48%. We're so, from a program perspective, looking good. Again, expenditures for contracted services are running high. And that is an area that we will, again, in Q3, really have to keep our eye on, especially as it relates to those areas of alternate care and adult protective services. As I mentioned, CCS would probably continue to run high too because the number of participants is up. I believe the number of participants, they've already exceeded, I think, the number of participants they had all of last year. So I think they've already exceeded that. So there we'll have a corresponding revenue. If we start to continue to run over in some of the areas, that could be something we have to pay attention to. Lastly, again, just make a pitch. There are plenty of more reports and details out in Report Central. I encourage you to look under the quarterly report section. You will also see in there's a quarterly director's report that I do that provides a little bit more context and a little bit more detail in some of these areas. And encourage you to read that and contact me if you have any questions.
Excuse me, Supervisor Wilkie, that's a question.
Well, first, Norb, I want to thank you and your team for that work in progress that you've been doing with reports. It's come a long way back from when you first came. I know there's still things that you're working on and towards, but the reports now, having them beginning to align with the budget and be consistent, and giving quarterly reports here with some detail and analysis is not taken for granted, but is appreciated. What we don't want to have happen come the end of the year, surprise. Mm-hmm. Well, we know this first part of the year we've got some budget issues that you outlined in the last line there in regards to where we're going over. But at least with what you're doing with the reports with yourself and your team, we're able to track it, and hopefully that oversight committees then have the opportunity to take corrective action. They can't take corrective action if they don't know there needs to be corrective action, and that has been a historic problem for us as a county. We now know the good, the bad, the ugly as we go along, and can make judgments. So I thank you for that, and please thank your staff.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are done.
Okay.
Finally. Thank you. Supervisor Schaaf, Administrator Schaaf, excuse me.
Probably. One moment, please. There we go. Good evening. What I was hoping to do tonight was to take a brief moment to give a preview of our 2020 budget. As you're very much aware, the process is well underway. At the department head level, they've put their requests together.
Reposition the mic.
Yes, I can. The department heads have put their requests together. They've taken them to oversight committees, and you've had discussion about not only the dollars to be expended, but the policy direction that you would like to see undertaken at that programmatic and departmental level. Some of the next steps in our process, I'd like to just give that very high-level view of tonight. and actually provide you as the board with some context as we move into the budget process. The two key points here are that this is your budget. Even though we'll combine the work, and in the next number of weeks, our team will be assembling, we'll be pulling information together, we'll be making some decisions. You'll see not only the recommendation, but you'll also see the rationale behind those decisions. And you will see at the end of it a balanced budget that will be provided to you at your September meeting. Again, it is your budget, and so you'll see a recommendation, but then it will be yours to work with from there. We also want to ensure as we move through our process that our funding distribution actually aligns with your priorities as a board and with your priority directions. And so that's why you'll see some of the information this evening provided to you in large buckets. And so I want you to see what those buckets look like and what they have looked like and what they're looking like right now for the 2020 budget. And of course, all of this information is very preliminary. There are a number of different assumptions that we utilize when we go into the budget process, and so I just wanted to give you a quick update on what those were looking like. And of course, you can read them for yourself, but there are a number of things as we go into this, and I think from the finance director's perspective, some of the things that he was sharing and some of the things that we're watching very carefully, such as sales tax, vehicle registration fee, and I think this is consistent with some of the work that the Finance and Budget Committee has done as well in being conservative in the approach in budgeting those. And so it is likely that as we proceed through this budget, you'll not see significant increases in those areas. They're going to be held very stationary as we watch what is happening on any number of fronts with the economy and what that means for us. You may see some increases to fees. I know that there were a number of different fees, fines, forfeitures that were reviewed at the departmental level, and where programs were not self-sustaining, it was identified if there needed to be a fee adjustment. So you'll see some modest increases in that regard. The net new construction estimate is slightly less than $500,000 at this point, so that gives you an idea of what we are going to have to work with from an overall net new construction number as we move forward putting this budget together. On the expenditure side, we know that our health insurance is likely going to be an increase of around, we're thinking about $400,000. That's based on some preliminary estimates. They are estimates. We will not have final numbers until early September. And so we've been working through this based on those estimates, and you'll be hearing more about that as we move through this process. We do expect there will be some slight increases in our property and liability insurance rates, and that is based on our history as an organization. And then when we look at it from a personnel standpoint, we are, of course, increasing our COLA by 1%, and we have the step increases, and so we're looking at between $200,000 to $300,000 to actually fund that portion of that. And the $200,000 to $300,000 is actually the 1% COLA. And that is cost of living. One of the things that you may be aware of is that we regularly, year over year, increase the overall scale. That's an adjustment that we make to the entire wage scale so that we continue to be market competitive. We are experiencing some issues in market competitiveness. If you look at some of the data for the Chippewa Valley, the actual changes in rate for salary structure is more in the 3% range rather than 1%. So that is an area where we are falling behind. Here is, and I actually emailed this to you, we will also have the presentation out in Report Central for you so that you'll actually be able to go to that, because I know that it's difficult to read here. Again, I emailed it to you earlier this evening, and you don't have to save it because it will be on Report Central. But this pie chart actually shows you the actual different functional areas that county government funds. And if you overlay the 2020 levy request, and that includes the base levy that was in each area along with the overall increases, it's very similar to 2019. And you would expect that based on we usually start with the base of the prior year, and then we make alterations to that base. And so the key message here that I would be interested in sharing with you is that the largest piece of this pie is actually debt service. And that is one of the key areas that we have been monitoring and looking at. And the next slide that I'm going to show you is going to show you why the debt service piece of this pie is so large. If you look at the magenta colored slice, that's actually transportation. It looks there like we don't spend a lot of money on transportation. And it's correct, we don't have a lot of operating levy in transportation. If you compare our operating levy for transportation to others, we're woefully underfunded. However, the way that we have actually made up for that is in the terms of the issuance of debt. So this is the chart with the debt allocated throughout the various functional areas. And you can see that the transportation significantly increases because the board made a decision that the degradation and the deterioration of our roadways was unacceptable. As you'll recall, we had one of the worst road systems in the state, and the decision was made that we needed to make some investment there. Because we do not have the operational levy to do that, the choice was made to actually bond for that. And that is what is actually driving much of our bonding and much of our debt at this point in order to meet the needs of our transportation system. And again, that is the magenta piece of that pie. The other, the green, is actually the area of public safety. That is our largest area of expenditure for actual tax levy. They have very limited other funding sources for their actual service. The property tax levy is the general funding for that. That includes your jail, the operations of the sheriff's department, 911 services, and emergency management. And so those are primarily funded by property tax levy. The yellow, which is the next of the pie pieces that's fairly large, is health and human services. That actually includes public health, or the health department, which we work cooperatively with the city of Eau Claire on, human services, the Aging and Disability Resources Center, veteran services, and child support. So there are a number of different buckets of service that are provided within each one of these pieces of the pie. So the other email that I sent you was the section summaries, because what you may want to do as you're looking at this and thinking about it is go back to those section summaries and take a look at what makes up each one of those buckets of service. And again, Norb and his team have structured all of our reports so they follow this common reporting structure so that when you see it in the budget or in Report Central, you'll be able to track back between the two. This chart actually gives an indication of overall levy growth year over year in each of the respective areas. As you can see along the bottom, you have the various categories of public service, general government. Of course, the largest on the far left is actually, again, debt, and that shows the increase of debt that we are utilizing year over year, and those are for the funding of not only our transportation infrastructure, but some of our essential, I would say, equipment needs. The sheriff's squad cars are funded through that mechanism. The laptops that we use, some of the equipment that we actually use, the iPads on your desk, are actually bundled and funded through that funding source because we do not have the operational capacity to fund them on the operations. So there are a number of things that are in debt that have created a year-over-year expense, and why you see the significant rise year-over-year in debt. The one next to that is, again, public safety, health and human services, and then they go on down the line. So you can see how year over year each one of those different areas has grown. And you will note that there is very little growth in many of those areas because we as a county government have been looking for efficiencies and ways to more effectively program that will actually have, hopefully, a positive trajectory for these expenditure areas. And so this is actually including, you'll see the 2020 request and what would happen based on what we're seeing right now for the 2020 request. I really want to do a shout out right now to Norb and his team. I am so appreciative of the amount of information that we currently have in the system that has been validated and verified that's giving us some of this front end look at our overall budget. This is as far along as we've been this early in the budget season as ever, and I think it is helpful to all of us as we continue to have dialogue around our budget. So ending up, ways to engage for you as board members. Again, it is your budget. And so we invite you to review the budget detail. We will have the actual individual departmental budgets for you online when the administrator's budget is presented. So you will be able to go and look at the overall recommendation. You'll also be able to go into the detail and look at what's there so that you can do your own analysis, study, and look at the overall budget. We invite you to attend the Finance and Budget Committee meetings. They review it in detail, and they have open public meetings. You'll notice that they have a very rigorous schedule. They have a lot of meetings scheduled as they go through this process. We also invite you to continue to have open dialogue in your committees about new changing trends. Where is the trend? What needs to be done to address that trend, and how are we strategically going to meet the overall goal of our organization? And then again, we invite you to participate in the budget amendment process. That is a process that was put in place so that as board members, you have the ability to consider an amendment and actually take the time to have it vetted. So you can go to Norb, you can go to the Corporation Council, you can come to myself, you can come to any member of our staff. We will help you with that. We will help you navigate that because we have an actual form that we put together that you can fill out. And if you would like to consider that, that is something that you can actually work through as an individual supervisor. One of the things that I believe we found to be valuable about that is that it allows for back and forth dialogue, and sometimes when we have the opportunity to more thoroughly vet it, it will give you as an individual supervisor a better and surer foundation for putting your amendment forward. And we are here to assist you in that to the extent that you would need it. And so I'm hopeful that some of the improvements that have been made this year will help you as supervisors. Right now, we're looking at about a $1.5 million gap between the ask and what we have for revenue. And so we've got some work to do. And you will see, again, the results of that at your next meeting. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Administrator Schaaf. Next item on our agenda are the written reports. I will not itemize the written reports, but they are listed in your agenda. And there is information in the packet on those items. The next item on our agenda is reports of standing committees, commissions, and boards under 2.04.160 and second reading of ordinances. First, from the Committee on Administration, file number 46. Excuse me. Supervisor Pagonis, did you have a question?
It was relative to the administrator's PowerPoint, so
I'm sorry, I apologize. I didn't
It's all
see.
right. It's fine.
So file 46.
Authorizing the Eau Claire County Housing Authority to occupy space at the Agricultural and Resource Center rent-free.
Motion. Supervisor Boerboom, second. Supervisor Pagonis. Explanation, Supervisor Bates.
And thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh. Sorry.
Thank you.
Took me a moment there, sorry.
This particular resolution is actually only to authorize the change in the lease for the Housing Authority. They've already made the move to the Ag Center, and the particular space has been assigned to them. And you can see from within the material that was distributed to you that the lease now will allow them a free rent status. The advantage of that is because they have limited administrative funding, would be that that funding also is able to be transferred to program areas. And so I think that this is a way of putting more money into programming that helps people get into housing and still gives them the kind of space that allows them to talk to their clients in a much more private atmosphere and to be able to have the space to accommodate the small staff that they do have.
Thank you. Supervisor Wilkie.
I should point out that the lease they currently have has been only for a very short period of time. Well in excess of 30 years, we've provided space for the Housing Authority with no charge. And the benefit of that has, because first I should say they are allowed very, very limited administration dollars from their granting source. So it's very tough if you add another administrative cost to them. We're talking about roughly $3,600 of revenue. So it's a small amount of money, but it serves a very significant and useful purpose for the Housing Authority because they are able to use that in-kind contribution by us as a match or leverage for the grants they write. So it's extremely important for them. And with the Housing Authority and other nonprofits, we've had this as a past practice. So it's not like we're setting a precedence by any means. And of course, with the fact that there's been much discussion and efforts within our community to deal with the issue of individuals having affordable housing in our community. It's important we make this effort to support the housing effort that the County Housing Authority does, because they're essentially, even though they're separate from us now, they are our arm of housing assistance in our community. So I encourage your support.
Supervisor DeLuca.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have just a couple of questions. I know that the document that Supervisor Leary sent out was concerned about three things, and I just wanted to make sure that the Altoona Center offered that to them. A reception area, enclosed office spaces for privacy, and handicap access, especially with it being on second floor.
They actually have met all of those criteria.
All right, and then I just have one other question. In the documentation, I did not see, is it for an indefinite period, the rent-free, or are we looking at some kind of set time frame and then looking at it again later on?
The actual document changes the agreement so that it would be rent-free in perpetuity. It would be listed in the in-kind services that the county provides to the Housing Authority.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I see no other requests to speak. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 46.
Unanimous.
27 aye, it is unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is file number 8.
This ordinance makes changes in the county code under vehicles and traffic regarding the section vehicle abandonment and impoundment.
Motion, Supervisor Leary. Second, Supervisor Beckfield. Explanation, Supervisor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, yeah. Sir. I can't either.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This particular amendment actually changes the ordinance and really is consistent with the practice that currently exists. The county no longer has an impoundment area, so obviously it needs to change in the ordinance to reflect that. now as it stands, when an individual has an incident along the highway and has to be towed away, this really has become more the responsibility of the owner of the car. They have the opportunity to take and choose their own towing agent and determine what happens with that vehicle. If indeed they are not able to do that and the car remains there, then the police department can indeed notify, police or sheriff can notify the towing company, but that's done through the communications center, and it's done with a rotating list. So basically, no one agency is automatically doing that work. The fee for storage, if it does end up in the county, is at $30, which I think has been the same for quite some long period of time. I urge your support.
Supervisor Dunning.
I'm going back to the person who spoke against this during the public hearing, and that this does not answer the questions that were raised before, and all it does is change it changes the statutes. Have we solved the problem? I mean, I see his point that if you get a call from the sheriff or the police department that there's a car out there, you can charge whatever you want. There's no fixed fee. This is wide open as far as problems that are going on, and I see problems with this. I think we should respond to those issues that were there and include that with the need to update the code.
Thank you. Supervisor Coffey.
My question is, and I'd like some legal help on this if I could, about whether there's a reason why we can't have a bidding system, which our resident thought might be a good idea, and I tend to agree, and also really agree with what Supervisor Dunning is saying, that I think a bidding system could be developed to create some consistency in towing and impoundment, and is that possible?
Well, initially what this amendment was created to do was to change the code section so it reflects what's going on, and in particular that there is no longer an impound lot. An impound lot has not existed for some period of time. Even the prior statute or code section reflected that the cost of towing was the responsibility of the individual owner of the vehicle. And it also reflected that a cost would be imposed upon that individual. Essentially what we're doing here in these changes is reflecting that there is no impound lot, that the cars, when they're towed, are no longer being towed to the county highway department and stored there anymore. It reflects the fact that if your vehicle is abandoned, it's common practice here in Eau Claire County, and I would imagine the rest of the state, that the law enforcement officer calls the communication center. If the individual is able to select a towing company, they're given that opportunity to do that. If they're not able to do that, then it goes to a rotating list, and whatever towing company shows up and tows the vehicle. That's at the cost of the individual. It's not at the cost of the county. County is not responsible for the individual's vehicle. Your question as to whether or not we can create a bidding system, well, that's putting a regulation upon all of the towing companies is what we're doing. I have not researched that question. I think that's a bigger project than what we're sitting here talking about tonight, which is some changes to the code section. You're talking about how would you administer that? How do we have the regulatory authority even to do that? Those are all questions that would need to be answered. And I haven't researched those subjects as of this time, and then you get into a whole system of dealing with regulating, monitoring, and setting. You're talking about people, expenses, all kinds of things.
Supervisor Wilkie.
I would keep in mind that the only purpose of this being brought forward to the board was to update our current practice consistent with our ordinance. So it's our ordinance with these changes is now how we are practicing in the county. The administration committee did on a vote 4-0 that you accept the changes, which aren't really changes. We're just putting it in the ordinance what we're doing. And I had the sense that the administration committee was not interested in getting into the contracting for towing services or overseeing it. However, if there are ideas out there of folks that you think the county should be in that business, I would encourage that supervisor or supervisors to introduce their own ordinance and in terms of how they would like to see the practice. So I'd rather you look at this ordinance change here as being we're cleaning up our ordinance. And if you've got something in mind, put it in writing and bring it before the board.
Thank you. Supervisor Chilson.
Thank you. I spoke to this issue last time, and unfortunately, I was able to deal with it once again in the last week with a disabled vehicle having to be towed about 9 miles, and the bill was $350. I understand what Corporation Counsel is saying about whether or not we want to get into it, but I think the underlying desire becomes is if we as a board want to have some type of uniform cost structure, or at least an idea for people that are having their cars towed and impounded so that they have an idea of what they can expect to pay. I personally don't think it's unreasonable that we as a county should look into this, because in a way we're responsible for it. We're directing, and it is for public good, it is for public safety that these cars be towed. But then we're entering into a situation where we're contracting with a service and we have no idea the financial implications that we're imposing by doing so. I'm not arguing the fact that the cars do not need to be removed. They don't need to be put somewhere. However, there is no financial schedule to know what the approximate cost should be. I agree with what was stated by the speaker tonight at the podium, and I guess I'm going to make a motion to send it back to administration with the instructions for Corporation Counsel to come back to the board and give us an update of whether or not a bidding process could be implemented, and whether or not that we can establish some kind of financial worksheet to know a cost per tow, a cost per mile, and a cost per day at impound. And as I read it, I mean, I question how a police officer is going to get a hold of a person with a vehicle. I look at through my business, when you register your own car personally, I'm not aware of anywhere that you put a phone number on it. The dealership, there is a phone number that's applied on the motor vehicle title application. Whether or not that phone number is the one that can be used to access a person's car before it's towed, I would question that. But anyway, my motion is to send it back with the instructions to see if a process could be established by the county and put into place.
Okay, we have a motion to refer to committee. The committee, I assume, would be administration. This requires a second by Supervisor Leary. This is open for debate and discussion. What we're discussing is the motion to refer to committee. Supervisor Pagonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excuse me, is this to the motion to refer to committee?
It will be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Because I was going to make that exact same motion. I was going to make it a motion to postpone until additional research can be done and some of the questions could be worked out. Lance Basting has been here twice. He was here a few months ago. He came again tonight, and he brought up several concerns. Clearly, he brought them up from an informed point of view. Talking about the daily rate, I thought most importantly, no recourse for the vehicle owner, that there's nothing in that. And, you know, I'm sympathetic that the original ordinance that we received is a rewrite to update to where the practice is. But if we're going to go through this process, we should be looking at the other options that have been suggested. They were suggested by Mr. Basing a few months ago. They've been suggested again tonight. So I am very much in support of postponing. I think it would be a good idea to postpone to a date certain, such as one of the meetings in September. But however Mr. Chair decides to make the agendas.
Well, we have a motion on the table to refer to committee.
Yes.
So we'll dispose of that first, then if you wish to make a separate motion.
I'm just agreeing to refer back to the committee.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Henning.
I'm just curious, as how are you going to obligate a towing company to go by your rules? They're a private entity, and if they say, I'm going to change, I'm in charge of what I want, how are we going to force them to charge our rate? This is what I'm wondering how we're going to do that.
Well, that would be, I think, a question for the committee when it's referred to committee. So I'm going to ask that that be put in the back of the heads of the members of the administration committee, and we'll certainly consider that. Supervisor Buchanan.
Yeah, I just wanted to very briefly vocalize my support for this motion to refer, thanking Supervisor Chilson for it. And just one of the things that I wanted to bring up is I was really prepared to vote on this ordinance amendment as presented, because it was just a simple updating of previous existing codes because of everything that's happened. And as our Corporation Counsel had pointed out, or kind of hinted around, I think maybe, is that the broader idea of going deeper into new regulatory wouldn't necessarily be the purpose of this ordinance, but it would be a policy decision of this board if that's something we wanted to do. And I think by voting yes to refer to committee, we're kind of making that statement as a board that at least we want to look at that possibility. Whereas a motion not to refer to committee could be interpreted as simply important to update our ordinances and keep them on, in proper place, but against that idea, even though it could be brought up by individuals later. I don't want to take away that right. So I just wanted to express my support for the motion to refer back to committee to give it some policy weight that we as a board think it's important that we look at the fees that are being charged to individuals who are in our charge.
Supervisor Coffey.
I just want to support the motion. I think that it's very important that we have a bidding process in place that could be implemented.
Thank you. Are there any other requests to speak? Any other questions? I see none. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand. We are voting on the motion to refer to committee. Please vote. Can't see the board. What's the vote?
Supervisor Schroeder, let's go on.
Unanimous.
No, we have one no.
25 to 3.
25 to 3. 25 yes, 3 no.
Sorry. 25 to 1 no.
25 to 1. 25 yes, 1 no. The motion passes. The item has been referred to committee. Thank you. The next item on our agenda is file 49.
Authorizing change of venue of the Veterans Tribute Trail.
Just a point of clarification. This is only to approve the change of venue. It has nothing to do with the money assigned. Simply changes it from the 4th Street area garden to Altoona. Motion, Supervisor Henning. Second, Supervisor Lavelle. Speaking to it, Supervisor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. You've heard a lot of discussion this evening about the passion and the support for this particular project. This particular resolution simply changes the venue. It does nothing else. It changes it from where it had been, down near Forest Street, out to the Altoona site. Thank you.
Supervisor Wilkie.
We voted on this before, and there was an overwhelming majority. I'm viewing this as what we're doing is reaffirming our commitment and clearly are recognizing that it will be in the city of Altoona. So that's essentially what we're changing. In administration committee, I was advised by Supervisor Henning that the city of Altoona is still in Eau Claire County, so we shouldn't have a problem.
And Supervisor Henning does have that now.
I would ask that as a show of respect and appreciation to our vets, that you vote yes with no delays, ifs, ands, or buts.
Supervisor Pagonis. Dunning, excuse me, Supervisor Dunning, then Supervisor Pagonis.
Thank you, Chair. I am going to be voting in favor of this. I think it's a purpose that is very much needed. And as it's been expressed in the previous testimonies by the public, we have forgotten a number of people. The Vietnam vets were never welcomed back. And it's time that we do welcome them as we go along. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Pagonis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to bring up a few things. The Veterans Tribute Trail is going to have a specific section called an Eau Claire County Veterans Honor Mall. So that is really something that indicates that the Eau Claire County is honoring the veterans and is taking part, and this is a very important piece of it. Secondly, the state of Wisconsin has gone beyond even having veterans memorials as a policy statement. They've gone so far as to have a section in the statutes that permit and encourage counties and other municipalities to be able to acquire land and raise funds and to appropriate money to veteran memorials. And this is a very important point because it's for the construction, erection, and maintenance of memorials. And so the fact that the state statutes has a very explicit statute is important. The third thing I want to mention is that exactly 1 week ago today, I did a step-parent adoption. But the step-parent was not in the room. He's down at Fort Hood in Texas. 27-year-old man. He's adopting his 5-year-old, it was a stepdaughter, now his daughter. He's left his 27-year-old wife, his 8-month-old child, and now his 5-year-old daughter because he's being deployed. And it wasn't in my interest to have this little girl without a father. He's going to be deployed for 400 days. He's a member of the National Guard. He was part of that large contingent who went. It was a very emotional time for mothering children because Dad wasn't there. He was on the phone. So when we talk about honoring our veterans, we were talking about our World War II and Korean and Vietnam and veterans. But we have young people today who are honoring their country, and they're doing what they need to do. So I think that this is a very important showing and that we need to pay our respects.
Supervisor Jansen.
Thank you. I have a question first before I start. Just I'm a new supervisor and kind of understanding Robert's rules and all of that. Is there a way that I could make a motion in the future to move something forward in the agenda? Because I want to thank the veterans for their service and for their dedication, and I think the fact that you are still here this late shows your passion for this project, and so I want to know if in the future there is a way that I can make that motion.
You can make it in two ways. One is in the approval of the agenda at the beginning.
Okay.
You could indicate that change. And you may make a motion to alter the agenda at any point in the meeting.
Okay,
when
thank
we're
you.
not engaged in another business.
Perfect. Good to know for future reference.
Okay.
The other thing that I want to say is that, this project has my full support. While it doesn't fall in my district, the VFW Post 305 is less than a block. It's 1 block away from my house. And so one of the things that I love to do, and I think it's one of the best kept secrets in Eau Claire, is to go there for breakfast. It's a beautiful place. It has a great, it's been recently remodeled, overlooks Dells Pond. It's absolutely gorgeous. But one of the things that I constantly see when I go there for breakfast is I see veterans gathering and sharing stories and interacting. And so I think having another space, a beautiful space along the river where they can go to honor their service, honor other people's service, and then also, we talk a lot about, suicide rates and mental health rates and things like that. And a lot of the conversations that I've heard from the veterans who have come to speak is that this is a place of healing for them. Grief never goes away, trauma never goes away. And so it's a place that could kind of provide a little bit of healing that I, as somebody who has never served, wouldn't be able to understand. So I do urge your support for this.
Supervisor Knight.
Thank you. I guess I understand we're voting on moving the change of venue.
Change of venue, yes.
I guess I have no problem with that. I do have a problem with paying the same amount that we had allocated for the Eau Claire County.
That would probably require a separate action.
Okay, would that be better to wait till?
Yes. Okay. Supervisor Buchanan, you have a comment?
The question about if Supervisor Knight's comment or question is regarding opposing the funding, this is not an authorizing board that the Veterans Foundation needs to go through to move to Altoona. They've already moved. They already have the authorization to move. This is the authorizing resolution to release the funds in Altoona because they broke contract by being in Eau
that's
Claire.
incorrect. This is just changing venue of the memorandum of understanding, language in the memorandum of understanding, changing the language from the city of Eau Claire to the city of Altoona. That's all it's doing.
Correct. We're not the authorizing body that they need approval in order to build in Altoona.
I believe that Supervisor Knight is referring to the amount of money which was authorized by this board.
Correct.
Contributing. And we do have the authority over that.
Correct.
To do anything about that would be a separate action, separate from the motion we have in front of us for change of venue. I believe that's correct. Would that be correct?
Yes.
Tim?
Yes.
I guess point of information. My question would be, if this got voted down, would that mean that the foundation is not authorized to receive the $450,000?
I believe that's probably accurate because the venue wouldn't have changed then.
Right. They wouldn't be able to meet the conditions in the memorandum of understanding.
Yeah.
That we have with them right now.
Okay. Supervisor Knight, was that wish to take the action that you're describing? That would be a separate action.
Okay, could I do that tonight also?
I don't think so. It's not on our agenda to address that. So I believe it's a separate action.
I am curious, though, about this. There were a number of contingencies that involve the city of Eau Claire, which are not going to be met, that I thought we had in our memorandum of understanding.
And what this resolution does is change where it says City of Eau Claire and that memorandum of understanding to City of Altoona. Just changing the venue from one area to another.
Supervisor Henning.
We've heard the word respect quite often tonight. This decision was made by the VFW members of their organization. This was not from Altoona or anybody else. This decision was made by the VFW board. And I think we should show our respect to them for their own organization on the decision that they want made and move ahead with this and approve it.
Supervisor Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I would like to speak in favor of passing this resolution because of the fact that we've had some ill feelings. The veterans have felt that we have not respected them because we've been parsing over a lot of things that in some minds it's almost like refighting some of the protests of the 60s and 70s. And I think that's inappropriate. We need to pass this tonight so that they understand that this truly is a tribute. There's many other things here that have been expressed in a prior meeting I don't wish to get into, but I think that kind of devalues what we're trying to do here. So I would strongly urge you not to argue about some of these other points. I think that has already been decided by, I hope, a majority of the board here. I hope our veterans take the message back that we do value them, that the families that have lost loved ones in war and other citizens in our county understand that we respect their loved ones that are no longer with them. And I would encourage your vote in favor of this tonight. Thank you.
And just a reminder to the supervisors, this is change of venue only. Supervisor DeLuca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm remembering back to when this came before us, and one of my questions, final question on the board floor, was in regards to number 1 on the MOU. And I think this is where Supervisor Knight is concerned and I am concerned. I remember asking that they have to raise $2 million minimum before they have access to the $450,000 that the county was going to give them. And the answer was yes. So I'm looking at the sheet, and it says that I know they worked really hard, and I respect the fact they did work really hard, but they have 1.4 million listed, and of that 1.4 million is our 450,000. So they actually don't have quite 1 million raised. I know they state that they have 500,000 in grants applied for, but that's not grants received. And even if you figure the 500 plus the 95,500, then they're not even at 2 million. So
Excuse me,
I don't
Supervisor
understand.
DeLuca, the point you're raising is not relevant to the motion. The motion is simply change of venue.
All right, then I make a motion that we accept the change of venue, but that we request the Veterans Foundation to come back to the county board in request for the funding.
You are free, as a member of the assembly, you're free to make any motion you wish. I suspect that the motion you're making now may not be very successful. However, since you've made it, I
Okay.
feel an obligation to follow it.
My question, this is the first time I've done this, okay? So my question is, if we say yes to this proposal, where do we get the opportunity to discuss the funding?
The MOU does not go away. The MOU remains in effect. So those first conditions that they have to show evidence of funding of $2 million from philanthropy and other private and other public sources still exist. They still have to do that.
All right. Okay, then I withdraw my motion then.
Since it wasn't seconded, you have the privilege to withdraw
Good,
it.
thanks.
Okay, thank you. Supervisor Buchanan, do I have this correct that you
Yes.
wish to speak?
So before I get into my other comments, I would like to respond to the questions, comments brought forward by Supervisor Knight and DeLuca, and maybe that others are thinking. When we voted on the original memorandum of understanding, which I supported at the time, and I'll get into that in my speech later, the memorandum, if I'm not mistaken, says you must meet certain qualifications, you must meet certain agreements. If said agreements are met, we will release funding to you, and it'll be released in different stages. This motion that is before us exists for only one reason. The Veterans Foundation did not meet the memorandum of understanding. They are out of compliance and ineligible to receive the funding from the memorandum of understanding. Let me repeat that. They broke the memorandum of understanding. They are requesting an amendment to the contract so that they can fall back into compliance, or that they can become compliant in the new location. For any county board supervisor who has issues or concerns about releasing $450,000 to this organization, a yes vote on this motion in this body will release that $450,000, assuming that other conditions of their fundraising are maintained. A vote of no would prevent a point.
Excuse me, we have a point of order. I'll attend to that first. Point of order.
The point of order, the MOUs exist, and
Yes.
a yes vote tonight doesn't release any funding because there still has to be compliance.
I will rephrase that statement. A yes vote tonight will allow them to still be eligible for the $450,000. A no vote, because they are currently, as I've talked to Corporation Counsel before, they are currently 100% ineligible because they broke the original memorandum of understanding. They did. They are ineligible for the funding. A no vote would mean that they would be unable to receive the money. So if you do not support them receiving the money, that's a no vote.
That's not
Corp
what
Counsel.
I have not said that they would be ineligible. What I've said is that it does exist right now with the
They can't hear you. Put your...
Oh, what I said is that as the memorandum of understanding exists right now, they would have difficulty meeting all of the responsibilities of the foundation because of the requirement that they have an agreement with the City of Eau Claire and approval of the City of Eau Claire of required plans. The MOU does not have an expiration date on it at this point, so it's still in effect until there's a determination that those conditions cannot be met.
Can those conditions be met in the City of Altoona?
Arguably, no.
Thank you.
But that's why they're requesting that it be modified.
Correct. And so if we vote no, then they would not be eligible for the $450,000 by staying in Altoona. Correct?
Well, that's a decision for the board to make tonight.
Okay. So
I believe the answer to your question is
yes.
Yes, because it leaves the current MOU in effect, and technically, they would be out of compliance. I think that's
They would be out of
technically correct.
compliance. Correct. They would be out of compliance and unable to receive the $450,000. So if you're a board member who is okay with them moving to Altoona, but has concerns with the county's donation, then voting no still allows them to build in Altoona because they do not require our approval in order to have the tribute project in Altoona. You can vote no and the project still happens because they are allowed to build the project in Altoona with or without our approval. We are not an approval body for the project. We're only a donation body, just like any other organization asking if we should donate or not.
I believe we are the body which approved the memorandum of understanding, which
For the
contains that.
donation,
And
not
therefore,
for the-
and therefore, I believe we are the funding authority for that by virtue
We're
of
the funding authority for a donation. We are not an approval body for their ability to build
That
in
is
Altoona.
correct.
Thank you. So again, to answer Supervisor Knight and to Luca's comment,
Okay.
we'll know if we want the project to go forward without our donation. Why am I making a big deal out of this?
Brandon, just a minute. For some reason,
having
you're
trouble
not
with your
coming
mic.
through.
Sorry.
It's on
Is it
now.
on now, or?
Yes. Does Supervisor Henning wish to call the question?
Yes. In the middle of the speech, I still hold the floor.
The request can be made to call the question at any time. And it's a decision of the chair since it's not a motion to call the question. I believe we've had plenty of discussion about this. Therefore, I'm going to call the question. So I'm going to ask supervisors to take your keypads in hand and to vote on changing the venue.
Point of order, this would be a vote on voting, not a vote on the change in venue.
Well, I'm reading the resolution, authorizing change of venue of the Veterans Tribute
No,
Trail.
this would be a motion to call the question. A motion to call the question would be...
Excuse me. No. That was a request to call the question. The chair determines a request to call the question. It is not a motion to call the question. If it were a motion, I would ask for a second and follow that vote. This is the chair making a decision to call the question. I have called the question. We are voting on it.
I would ask a ruling from Corporation Counsel. I
That's
believe I
correct.
still hold the floor.
That's correct. If there's a request to call the question and the chair says, we're going to vote now, that's what happens.
Robert's rules is very strong about an individual member's right to speak, and it
understand that,
would
but
be a
it's also-
two-thirds vote to cut off debate.
It also indicates that when there's a request to call the question, the chair then makes a decision as to whether or not there's a vote on the question.
I've made that decision. I'm calling the vote. Please take your keypads in hand and vote on file number 49.
What we're voting on tonight is just to move the outdoor.
Yes.
Right.
Wrong.
No, right, that is right.
Sorry, we shut down that discussion.
The money gets released on a yes vote. It does
Excuse me,
not get
members.
released on a no vote.
The discussion is ended. The question is called. Please vote.
And people are asking what they're voting on.
That answer was already given. The motion is to change the venue. That's it. That's what you're voting on. Supervisor Beckfield, Supervisor Jansen, Supervisor Moritz, Supervisor Anton. What is
2 to 5.
22 yes, 5 no. The motion passes. The next item on our agenda from Committee on Human Resources is file number 40.
Authorizing to abolish one FTE shop supervisor and to create one FTE shop superintendent.
Motion? Supervisor Gatlin, second Supervisor Dunning. Discussion, I believe, is Supervisor Gatlin. Is that correct? Oh, sorry. Brian.
Current position of shop supervisor in the highway department has been vacant, so as is our custom, we have reviewed the position description and determined that the current and as well as the future needs of the department, it would be better and more inclusive to change the title to shop superintendent and raise it 2 grades for the representing the higher level of tasks that this position is going to be required to do, including a better tracking of capital equipment. There'll be some scheduling, and they will also be helping with finances and reviewing invoices.
Thank you. Supervisor Knight?
Oh, no.
Sorry.
No comment.
Supervisor Chilson?
He's gone.
Oh, why am I getting these? Supervisor Bates?
Microphone's on.
Having trouble with the system, sorry. There you go, Supervisor Bates.
I'm sorry, I did not request to speak.
There's something going wrong with the system. Supervisor Schraufnagel, did you make a request to speak?
On the last topic,
Sure.
Supervisor Pagonis, let's try that.
I didn't make
I'm sorry, something's happening. Supervisor DeLuca?
Yes.
Were you
I
making a
did want
comment?
to ask a question out of this.
Okay.
So I see that the cost of the $10,333 will be covered by charging shop rates. Is that just for a one-year period, or will it be always covered by the shop rate increase, or will it become part of levy next year?
Supervisor Gatlin?
Well, that's correct. All the positions would be, the whole department operates with chargebacks of any of the services that they provide. As Administrator Schaaf or Catherine mentioned earlier, there is no levy going into the highway department right now. So if we, something really good happens and we start getting some of those levy dollars, they may be spread around that way.
But so then it's being covered by our capital project dollars then? No.
Actually, there is some levy that goes into the department. I think that what Supervisor Gatlin was referring to is the construction portion is in bonding, but we do have some operating levy in there. But as Supervisor Gatlin indicated, we're also able to bill back to other entities, whether it be the state or other overlying taxing jurisdictions, for services we provide on their behalf. And so that funding structure would essentially stay the same year over year for the position. And what the highway commissioner would do is every year as they're looking at the budget, we always maximize revenues. So if they can obtain additional revenue, that would actually be applied.
Point of order.
What is your point of order, Supervisor Buchanan?
Order is Article 7 of Robert's Rules of Order, Section 42, and I'm quoting word for word. The right of a member to debate and make motions cannot be cut off by the chair putting a question to a vote with such rapidity as to prevent the member getting the floor after the chair has inquired if the assembly is ready for the question. Even after the chair has announced the vote, if it is found that a member arose and addressed the chair with reasonable promptness after the chair asked, "Are you ready for a question?" he is then entitled to the floor, and the question is in exactly the same condition as it was before it was put to the vote. But if the chair gives ample opportunity for members to claim the floor before putting the question, and they do avail themselves of it, they cannot claim the right to debate after voting has commenced.
Thank you for your clarification. We're going to move on.
The previous call to vote for you was out of order, according to Robert's Rules of Order.
I do not accept that, because if you examine that passage carefully, you'll see that we did have extended discussion and extended opportunity.
The right of a member to debate and make motions cannot be cut off by the chair putting the question to a vote.
I dealt with the call to question as a privilege of a member. It's a determination the chair has made.
The right of the member to debate and make
appeal,
motions cannot be cut off by the chair.
Read the rest of the passage.
Cannot be cut off by the chair putting a question to vote with such rapidity as to prevent the members getting the floor after the chair has inquired if the assembly is ready for the question.
It is my
Even
judgment that that
after-
condition was fulfilled. That condition was fulfilled.
That's literally the opposite of what this says.
It is not. Supervisor Bates.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I believe that you did not ask to call the question.
I did not.
I believe the request to call the question came from the body.
Correct.
Supervisor Henning. Supervisor Henning asked to call the
Oh,
question.
right, yes. We're not going to have a debate about Robert's rules. I made a determination. The member has a privilege to appeal the decision, and that such an appeal did not happen. Therefore, we're going to proceed. That is the end. Okay. Where are we?
We're on file 40.
Oh, on file 40. I see no other requests to speak. Please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 40. Supervisor Coffey, Supervisor Henning. Oh, Chilson's not here. All right. We have the vote. 26 ayes, that is unanimous. Next item on our agenda, file 36.
Authorizing reclassification of one FTE Community Service Coordinator in the Administration Department.
Motion. Supervisor Bates, second. Supervisor Lavelle. Explanation, Supervisor Beckfield.
This is actually a reduction in a position. The position came open. They reviewed the position. This alignment would actually, the replacement would be brought in at a level lower. Therefore, there is a seen savings which is shown in your packet.
I see no requests to speak. Supervisor, oh, no. I see no requests to speak. Is that correct? Please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 36. That is 26 aye. That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Next is file 29.
Authorizing to abolish one FTE Fiscal Associate and to create one FTE Accountant.
Motion, please. Supervisor Beckfield? Motion? Oh, okay. Motion by Supervisor Boerboom, second by Supervisor Pagonis. And to speak,
This is basically upgrading an associate to a accounting position, which is more in alignment with what the job is. There is an increase, but that is covered by funds that are brought in by the ADRC, so there is no fiscal impact.
Thank you. Supervisor Miller. You're on. You should be on.
There, now it's on.
Sorry, we're having trouble with the system tonight.
Yeah,
You're
I
on.
was just going to jump in and, but Mark really very nicely and concisely put it all together. Actually, the prior director and the current director had, as this position moved into the ADRC, the two had taken some time to review the workload and compare that to the job description. And again, this is one of those where when there was some time to really look at it, the person is doing a lot more fiscal work than what was originally thought would happen. So the ADRC board supports it, wholly supports this, in knowing also that there isn't a fiscal impact on the levy. That makes it a little bit easier to swallow. Thank you.
Thank you. I see no requests to speak in regard to this file. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote. This is file 29.
29.
File 29. Supervisor Neiman? You haven't confirmed. There we go.
26, yeah.
26 ayes, it is unanimous, thank you. From Planning and Development, file number 28.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Union.
Motion, Supervisor Lavelle, Second, Supervisor Bates. Explanation, Supervisor Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Oh, sorry.
Reporting from the Planning and Development Committee.
It's on now.
Okay. For the non-metallic mining overlay for the town of Union, this is for 74.25 acres. Public hearing was held by the P&D committee, and we considered that the town of Union board made a recommendation for approval of 4-0. We held a public hearing, and it was considered they did have to pay a double fee for this because they had started with the non-metallic mining ahead of that, but so they had to pay double fees. And after the hearing, the motion for the P&D committee was 4 in favor of the overlay district and 1 against, and I encourage your support.
Just a point of clarification, this is an ordinance and it's second reading, so we are voting on it tonight. Supervisor DeLuca.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I see that it's Industrial 1 identified as non-metallic mining overlay district. In reading in my packet on page 46, under Eau Claire County applicable policies, it says that you could do ag-related business, cottage industries, utility, recreation, religious or government, and mineral extraction. It doesn't identify non-metallic. So my question is, would there be a possibility that later on in the future, they could come back and say, we're interested in mining not just the sand and the gravel, but the precious metals underneath?
Is that Supervisor Miller's microphone?
Yes.
Okay. I'll do both there.
I'm Matt Michaels with Planning and Development. So with regards to Supervisor DeLuca's question, non-metallic mining is a type of, what was the word? Mineral extraction. So it's just a subset of that. So it is considered a permitted use. This is a situation that was actually unbeknownst to the county until we received actually a complaint, investigated it, and when we do have a sand mining operation, we do need to permit that through the overlay district, which is what is entailed here. If anyone has any other questions, I can certainly answer those, but.
Supervisor Coffey.
Planning and Development, as was just stated, learned of this mining problem through investigation. And Menards has been operating this non-metallic mine site for many years without the necessary permits or approvals. Nick Brenner, who is from Menards, who I think is here today, said he didn't know a permit was required before it began mining. However, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, they had gotten a permit for part of it that they had been mining and were done using. They had gotten the permit previously. So it seems very disingenuous to me that they didn't know that they were required a permit. I'm also worried that the mining will go within the 10 foot of hitting our groundwater without monitoring wells, which as part of this passage, they're saying they are going to have 2 monitor wells. I am willing to pass this, but I'm very disappointed in Menards and think that even though that double permit cost of $8,600 is not very much money, and I am very disappointed, and I want to publicly state that I think Menards better be careful to do this correctly and not hit our groundwater and have the wells in place and follow protocol, because there have been many times it has not followed the rules and permitting, and I don't think we're slapping their hands hard enough.
am I assuming that you are not in support of this?
I am not in support. Thank you.
You do have the privilege of making a subsidiary motion that would affect this motion, such as postponing to a certain time, for example.
Okay. So I guess what I really wanted to do, and thank you very much for helping me think this through, Chair Schmeier, because my resolution would be to delay passage of this for 6 months so that Menards will think about not following the rules next time.
I believe that is a motion to postpone to a certain time, 6 months from now. Am I assuming correctly?
Yes, that is correct.
We have a motion to postpone to a certain time. Is there a second to that motion? A second by Supervisor Boerboom. Is there any discussion of the motion to postpone to a certain time? Supervisor Knight, are you addressing the motion?
I had pushed the button to speak before this motion was on the floor.
The motion is on the floor. You'd have to speak to the motion that's currently in front of us. And when that's up or down voted, then you can come back to your... sorry. Supervisor McKinney.
Yes, I also wanted to speak before the motion came up.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hold on that then. Supervisor Dunning, is this to the motion to postpone?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we need to recognize that the fact that they didn't apply, they are using that sand. And a postponement of 6 months would prevent them from using that sand, which would prevent them from manufacturing the SMED items that they're doing. The penalty for shutting them down for 6 months would be substantial. I think that this is, we can't get vindictive on something like this. We need to look at this as they got fined double the amount, and they did come and they brought it to us, and we have the opportunity. We looked at it. Other part of the property has already been mined for sand. They have restored it. They have done what they've needed to do. Now, holding a grudge against them is not, at this point, we shouldn't be doing. So I'm opposing this motion and moving forward to voting on the amendment as it was originally, or the motion as it was originally.
Thank you. Supervisor Maury.
My question was answered by Supervisor Dunning. Thank you.
Thank you. Supervisor Knight.
I believe they're using the sand to make cement, and I believe if we delay them for 6 months, they'll still be able to make cement by hauling in sand. However, from an environmental point of view, that's harder on the air quality, the neighbors, the roads, and everything else to have them truck sand into their to make cement that they already have in their backyard.
Thank you.
I never thought I'd be talking in favor of Menards, who have an admittedly checkered environmental history, but...
Sorry. Supervisor Leary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think also there's rules and regulations regarding rezoning and responsibilities, and I'm concerned that we might be opening up Eau Claire County to some other, I don't know, legal actions perhaps. I really think it's one thing to feel something, but you have to, this isn't going to accomplish, I don't think, one bit of good delaying it, but it will, I do believe, harm the county in the relationship, and I would encourage you, while you might have to hold your nose, I would encourage your support of the original motion as proposed. And I believe one of the two supervisors that's speaking against it now voted in favor of it in committee.
Supervisor Neiman. It should be on. Sorry. We're having some problems tonight. Still not on.
Is your amber light on, Martha? Okay, let's just try it again.
Tried mine for her.
Use Supervisor Schroffnagel's microphone.
The question I have is it correct to assume that Menards now does have the proper permits that ensure that they're operating as they should be?
Mr. Michaels?
Sure. So their main requirement is the submittal of a non-metallic mining reclamation permit, or excuse me, reclamation plan, which is currently being reviewed. They have 30 days from they have a public informational meeting. The DNR also has been engaged, requiring, their own permit. So they've indicated that Menards will obtain all required permits, so they are in that process. So the ball is rolling. One of the steps is to kind of get right with the county in terms of the non-metallic overlay district.
Thank you. Supervisor Neiman? Thank you.
question's answered.
I see no other request to speak. You are voting on the motion to postpone for 6 months. Please take your keypads in hand and vote accordingly.
Four yes, 22 no.
22 no and 4 yes. The motion is defeated. We are back to the main motion.
Could we hear the main motion?
Sorry?
Could you repeat the motion?
The resolution.
The resolution.
Repeat.
It's amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Union.
Is there anyone who wishes to speak to that motion? Supervisor Beckfield.
The town of Union agreed unanimously?
Yes.
4-0. One of the things we need to start thinking about in Eau Claire County is growth of industry. And sending a negative message to industry is not a good idea at any time. And I do feel that if they're truly trying to get in compliance and do everything right, I think we should move forward on it and just accept what we got and go from there.
Thank you. Supervisor McKinney.
Yes, back to my question, perhaps Supervisor Dunning answered it. Was there a fine imposed for being out of compliance?
Mr. Michaels, do you know this?
Just the double fee, that's really the only thing that we are, I guess, empowered to do. We don't have we can't impose we can't impose any kind of like civil fines or anything. Now, the DNR perhaps within their jurisdiction will be able to. But again, the double fee is the hammer, I guess, that P&D, the small hammer that P&D wields in this case.
Supervisor Knight.
I'm on the Planning and Development Committee, and this is not a year-round mine. This is relatively small quantities of sand they're taking from on their property. Again, it's actually better from an environmental standpoint if they use that sand in their backyard again rather than trucking it in from somewhere else in the country. So I see this as an environment, even though it's Menards, they have I agree they have kind of a checkered environmental history, but I think they're actually doing it from an environmental standpoint. I think they're actually doing this right. And we also, on staff's recommendation, there's going to be 2 monitoring wells, groundwater monitoring wells on the edge of the property.
Thank you. I see no other requests to speak. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 28. Supervisor Neiman. Thank you. 23 yes, 3 no. The motion passes. Next is file 33, ordinance.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Lincoln.
Motion. Supervisor Lavelle, thank you. Supervisor Henning seconds. Explanation, Supervisor Leary.
Thank you. This is for rezoning it from 35.04 acres from RH Rural Homes District to A2 Agricultural Residential District to allow construction of an accessory building for personal use. This was passed by the Town of Lincoln Board at their meeting and is recommended 3-0. It does conform with the comprehensive land use plan, and that area has been identified for non-farm residential development, so it meets the requirements, and the P&D committee passed this unanimously, so I encourage your support.
Questions or discussion? I see no request to speak. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 33.
Twenty-six.
26 yes, that is unanimous. Thank you very much. Next is file 38.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Pleasant Valley.
Motion. Supervisor Beckfield, second. Supervisor Henning. Explanation, Supervisor Leary.
Okay, this one is to rezone 118 acres plus or minus from the A1 exclusive agricultural district to the RH rural residential district to develop a single-family residential subdivision. It's for 118 acres approximately. The Eau Claire County and Town of Pleasant Valley future land use maps both includes the property in the rural transition planning. The Pleasant Valley Town Board considered this at their August 12th meeting. They recommended approval 3-0. The Eau Claire P&D Committee conducted the required public hearing, and we had a vote in favor of the rezoning, 5 in favor, 0 against. So we would encourage your support.
Questions or discussion? I see no request to speak. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 38.
Five, 2,
25 yes, 1 no. The motion passes. Next is file 37.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Clear Creek.
Motion. Supervisor Beckfield, second. Supervisor Dunning. Explanation, Supervisor Leary.
Thank you. This is to rezone 11.75 acres from an AP Agricultural Preservation District to A2 Agriculture to allow the applicant's son to construct a single-family residence without the agricultural income requirements. The Clear Creek Board, they did, They moved for approval, the town board moved for approval, as well as the P&D committee. One point that came out in discussion in the hearing was that the soils on the property are non-prime, and so it is recommended for approval.
Questions or discussion? I see no request to speak. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote accordingly on file 37. Supervisor Henning. Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. It is a unanimous vote. Motion passes. Thank you. File 32.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Washington.
Motion. Supervisor Schraufnagel, is your hand up? Okay. Second, the Supervisor Knight. Explanation again, Supervisor Leary.
Okay. We're almost done here.
Sorry.
Okay. This is for rezoning 40 acres from the AP Agricultural Preservation District to A1 and 34.3 acres from AP Agricultural Preservation to A3 to allow for the construction of a single-family residence on each lot without the agricultural income requirements of the AP district. The Town of Washington future land use maps, as well as the Eau Claire County Comprehensive Plan, both include this portion of the property in the rural lands planning, and this would meet in that designation. The Washington Town Board moved for approval on a 4-0 vote, and the P&D Committee also voted 5 in favor, 0 against, and we recommend approval.
Questions or discussion? I see no request to speak. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 32. Right? 32. is unanimous vote. The motion passes. Thank you. File 44.
Amending the 1982 official zoning district boundary map for the town of Lincoln.
I'm going to ask, before I proceed with this, the committee did meet and did approve this? Bring it forward? Thank you.
Yes.
So a motion, Supervisor Beckfield, second. Supervisor Kronk, discussion? I'm sorry, explanation?
Okay, this is...
Supervisor Leary?
Earlier this evening, Tammy Schmidt-Schroeder spoke to you in the public comment period, hoping that you would approve this. It's regarding the rezoning of their property so that a family member could build a home on part of the homestead. The town of, Town of Lincoln Board recommends approval. The P&D Committee held a hearing. There was no one to speak against and only in favor, and the committee voted 5-0 in favor, as did the town board.
Thank you. Questions or discussion? I see no request to speak. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote on file 44. Vote thing up.
She's still down.
Supervisor Neiman, thank you. That passes unanimously. Thank you very much. The next item that's listed on your agenda is the one removed from the agenda, disallowing the claim of millage estates. So we will proceed to file 51.
Approving a budget transfer of $240,000 from the 6th courtroom capital projects account to provide funding for the design and construction of offices for the district attorney and for the City of Eau Claire special assessments in 2019.
Motion, Supervisor Wilkie. Second, Supervisor Dunning. Explanation, Supervisor Pagonis. You're on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the fact sheet's pretty self-explanatory. We saw this a month or so ago, although a month ago when we saw it, we had some set aside for the highway shop redesign. We did not act on that, and it was all postponed. Currently, what we're doing is we're still not going to be building out the 6th courtroom in 2019. We haven't gotten a final approval on getting the 6th judge, so that plan would all occur in, assuming we get the 6th judge, that would all occur in 2020. So currently sitting in our capital budget, we have $799,000, and we'd like to take $240,000 of that. Some of it, 172, would be to build out some offices back in the district attorney's office. He's been granted 2 new assistant district attorneys from the state, and so they will be starting pretty soon, and so we would like to get the build out for that. And the second thing is Grand Avenue was repaved and new sewer and gutter, and so we have a special assessment from the City of Eau Claire for $68,000. So we're asking to move from that capital budget for the 6th courtroom, move $240,000 to pay the City of Eau Claire and to build out the 2 additional offices for the district attorney. We need a 2/3 vote on this.
Yes.
2/3 vote of the total body.
Yes. Total membership. Questions or discussion? Okay, just to clarify, because this involves that amount of money, it does require a 2/3 vote of the full membership, correct, Tim?
It's because it's
And that is 19.
a modification to the budget.
Yes. That would be 19 votes, just so you know. I see no request to speak. Supervisors, please take your keypads in hand and vote accordingly. Oh, shoot. Sorry, I'm the laggard.
Supervisor Moritz?
The vote is unanimous. Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda is the appointment of the members of the Rural Broadband Committee. The members were appointed by Vice Chair Bates, acting as the chairperson. This now comes before the county board to approve the appointments. I believe you have the list in your packet, the list of names. Would I be obliged to read them? Is it necessary to read the names?
No.
Anyone wish me to read the names? Okay. Let's see, how do we do this? I think I'm going to do it by motion in a second. So could I have a motion to approve Beckfield, second by Supervisor Bates? Any question or discussion? Please take your keypads in hand and vote accordingly. Again. The vote is unanimous. Thank you very much. Before I say we're at the end of our agenda, I just wanted to make an announcement. Today is Administrator Schaaf's birthday, and the cupcakes in the back are the birthday cake. Did you have an announcement? Excuse me, Supervisor Bates has an announcement.
I'm going to take you home. All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a really quick thank you at the end of the meeting for our chair being back and conducting the meeting this evening. And welcome back home.
Thank you. Thank you. We are adjourned.
This program was brought to you by a cooperation between Newsworks and Eau Claire County. Newsworks is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, please contact us via phone at 715-839-5067 or online at valleymediaworks.org.